The stranger at dusk, in the fading light of a drizzly evening, where city streets blur into shadows. A single misstep can cost you everything. I stood alone at a gas station in Lacey, Washington, the hum of traffic a distant pulse, unaware of the eyes watching me. The air was heavy, the kind that clings to your skin and whispers caution. My day had gone wrong, a wasted trip, and now I was killing time, vulnerable in a place I didn't belong. Then he appeared, a figure crossing the street, his grin a warning I didn't yet see. He wasn't just a stranger, he was a threat, and I was his mark. I'd driven an hour from home to pick up a handgun, a purchase for protection in a world that felt less safe. I was out in Lacey to pick up a handgun I'd purchased for protection. The store didn't have it in stock, told me to come back. I lived an hour from Lacey. Evening rush hour was becoming unbearable. I didn't want to drive back home yet. It would add another hour to my commute. The car I was driving belonged to my dad. I was borrowing it until I saved up for a new car after my Honda broke down. The delay stung, but the traffic was worse, a snarl of headlights I wasn't ready to face. I lingered, killed time bumming around the store, then drove to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai. I walked back to my car. I drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill time until traffic thinned. The car didn't need gas. I pulled into a parking spot at the corner of the four-way street. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door to not stink up the interior. The weather was overcast, drizzly, not overly cold. Dusk, most daylight had disappeared. The stoplights in the intersection were diffused by the mist. I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red. Lost in thought, the rhythm of the lights hypnotic, I sipped my chai, the cigarette's glow my only warmth. But the city wasn't asleep. It was watching, and I was too distracted to notice. I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was halfway across the street. He was white, average height, strawberry blonde, mid-20s. Hadn't changed his clothes in a while. Carried a backpack full of belongings. He didn't smell, but looked raggedy, unkempt. My immediate thought was drugs were part of his lifestyle. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I'm cautious, having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. His clothes hung loose, his backpack sagged, but his eyes were sharp, locked on me. He finished crossing the street, limping toward my car, maintaining eye contact, a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, remained outside, smoking casually. Something about him felt off, like a performance I wasn't meant to trust. Hiboa. He approached, stood 10 feet away, said hello, asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, saw no harm, took 2 steps forward, lit his cigarette. He held out. He made small talk, weaving hints he'd gotten off the bus, needed to get down the road a block. Somewhere in his poorly crafted story, he stopped mid-sentence, pretended an epiphany, asked if I'd drop him off down the road. It's not far. His words were rehearsed, his grin too forced. I apologized, said I couldn't. It was my dad's car. I didn't feel comfortable without permission. It was a weak excuse, but it was all I had. He didn't like my answer. His smile turned tense, flatlined, clearly upset. He became insistent. "It's just down the road," whined. "My leg's killing me. It wouldn't be far. I'll give you a cigarette." His voice sharpened, a blade hidden in his plea. His persistence, sudden hostility, made my hair stand up. I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help. It's my dad's car." He set the rules. With 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I offered alternate ideas. Maybe someone in the gas station could help. call a ride. Each word made him irate. He curled his fingers into fists like a toddler about to scream. He paused, sized me up. I'm small, not intimidating physically. His eyes narrowed, calculating, and I felt the air shift, danger closing in. I told him I hoped he'd make it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in, locked myself inside. Looking up, I saw him speed walking back across the street. No limp, no awkward walk, no distress. A normal walk of a rageful person. He'd played me, his limp a lie, his story a trap. I knew I dodged a bullet, felt dumb for hanging around the city alone after dark. I started the engine, the chai cold in my hand. I didn't care about traffic anymore. Turned over the engine, hightailed it home in an hour and 45-minute drive. The traffic worth the inconvenience. The road stretched on, but my mind was on him. What did he want? I replayed his grin, his fists, the way he dropped the act. Was it robbery? Something worse? Growing up near Seattle, I'd seen enough to know the streets hid predators. This wasn't random. He'd chosen me. Small, alone, an easy target. I checked my mirrors, half expecting his face in the back seat. The gun I'd come for wasn't there, and I'd never felt more exposed. Back home, I locked every door. My dad's car safe, but my nerves frayed. I told a friend, a former cop, about the encounter. He nodded, unsurprised. Lacey had its share of drifters, some harmless, some not. He warned me about bus stop scams, cons to lure people into cars or worse. I searched online, finding stories of similar encounters. Men with backpacks, fake limps, escalating fast when refused. One article mentioned a robbery ring in the area, targeting lone drivers at gas stations. I reported it to the store, but they had no cameras at that corner. The man was a ghost, his intentions a shadow I couldn't shake. I stopped lingering in strange places, kept my dad's car locked even in daylight. The chai shop, the gas station, they felt tainted now, their charm lost. I saved up faster, bought my own car, one I could call mine. But that night stayed with me, a lesson in trusting my gut. I drive past Lacey sometimes, the gas station still there, its lights flickering. I don't stop, don't smoke, don't wait. Because in the mist, at dusk, someone's always watching, and I won't be caught again. The black-eyed stalker. You're on a beach at night, the waves crashing softly, stars blazing overhead. You and your friend, high on life and a little weed, laugh over Subway sandwiches, the world feeling perfect. But the forest trail back to your car is dark, and something's watching. You turn on your phone flashlights, and a rustle in the trees stops your heart. It's not an animal. It's matching your steps, and its eyes are black voids staring through the night. You and your friend had a spontaneous plan to hike Moore's Mountain and eat on the beach. The trail was an hour's walk, and by the time you reached the sand, it was pitch black. You brought only weed and Subway, no flashlights, headlamps, or hiking shoes. A dumb idea, you admit. For 2 hours, you lay on the beach, smoking, eating, and talking about life, the waves and stars creating a perfect night. The ocean's rhythm was hypnotic, the sky a canvas of light. You got tired and decided to head back, gathering your stuff and using phone flashlights to navigate. The trail felt different now, the darkness thicker, the forest alive. Not even a minute in, you heard movement in the forest to your left. You told your friend to stop, and the sound stopped too. When you walked, it matched your pace exactly, stopping when you did. Your pulse quickened. No animal you knew was that smart. You tested it again, stopping, and the sound halted. Your heart pounded. No creature should mirror your steps like that. You both turned your flashlights left and saw it. A pale figure with dead black eyes, standing with terrible posture. Its gaze was empty, like it saw through you. You swung your lights forward, asking if it was an animal. Your friend, voice flat, said, "No, we need to leave. Keep your eyes forward." The forest closed in, the air heavy with warning. The trail became a gauntlet. You noticed the trees, branches twisted into symbols, some like nooses, as if the forest was screaming danger. Was it your imagination, or was the woods alive? You swore you saw things, shapes in the shadows, eyes glinting. After an hour, you reached the car, shaken. You asked your friend about the trees, and they described the same symbols. On the drive home, your friend called their mom, who said, "I'm glad you weren't in the Appalachians." The next morning, your friend called. "We're idiots. We were in the Appalachians." You haven't stopped thinking about it, insisting the weed didn't cause it. You're both seasoned stoners. That thing was real, and it wanted you to see it. You started researching, your mind racing with stories of the Appalachians, tales of creatures with pale skin and black eyes, children or beings that lure people into the dark. The black-eyed children, they called them, though this thing felt older, hungrier. You found forums where hikers shared similar encounters, a figure stalking, mirroring steps, vanishing when confronted. Some said it was a spirit, others a demon, but no one knew for sure. You checked your phone's photos from that night, hoping for proof, but found only blurry shots of the trail, one with a faint white smudge in the corner. Your friend refused to talk about it, their voice tight with fear. You stopped hiking, avoided the woods, but the memory clung like damp moss. Those eyes, dead, black, endless, followed you into your dreams. The silent intruder. The morning was gray, the air heavy with the promise of rain as I pulled into my driveway, the house standing silent and empty. I was 20, bleary-eyed from a night at my boyfriend's, the early hour dragging at my bones. I came home after sleeping at my boyfriend's place. My parents were gone, off on a 2-week holiday, leaving me alone. My parents were already gone like an hour earlier on their holiday, so I was alone at home, and I knew it. I just wanted my bed, to sink back into sleep. I came home, and I directly went to my bedroom to continue my night. But something stopped me cold. At the foot of the stairs, I glanced toward the kitchen and froze. Before climbing the stairs, there's 2 floors. I saw the kitchen door or window was wide open. The window gaped, curtains fluttering in the breeze. I was surprised by this, but I just thought that maybe my parents accidentally left it open. My dad was paranoid, obsessive about locks. You have to know that my father is super paranoid though, and really there was no way that he would have forgot to close it, especially the windows before leaving the house for like 2 weeks. I'd been at my boyfriend's, the house empty. Plus, I was sleeping at my boyfriend's place, so there was definitely nobody home, and he would have known that. I brushed it off, too tired to think straight. I shut the window, the frame cold under my fingers, and checked the kitchen and living room. Anyway, I was barely awake, so I just CL the door. I checked the kitchen and the living room just to be sure. Nothing seemed off. No mess, no signs of trouble. I climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, where 3 rooms waited. And then I went to go to my room. There are 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. I changed, slipped into the bathroom, then returned to my room. And I went to change in my room. Then I went to the bathroom, and I go back to my room. For no reason, I closed the door, a habit I rarely followed. I closed the door to my room, and I didn't know why. But I never really did this normally. I settled in, scrolling through my phone, the world fading. 5 minutes passed, my eyes heavy, notifications blinking. In any case, I was scrolling on my phone, and like 5 minutes later, then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft but deliberate, right outside my door. I heard footsteps right behind my door, so somebody was definitely there the whole time while I was doing my life just sort of vulnerably like this. My heart seized, breath caught in my throat. I was terrified my heart stopped. I couldn't move. Someone was in the house, had been there the whole time, silent, watching. I grabbed the nearest thing, a babyless curling iron, its weight a frail defense. And I just took the first thing in front of me to defend myself, my babyless. I stared at the door, every muscle coiled, waiting for it to swing open. My mind raced. Jump out the window, scream, fight. I stared at my door, waiting for the person to open up and kill me. Or worse, I was ready to jump out of the window and die if I saw the door opened. Minutes crawled by, each second a lifetime. Minutes passed. Then, the footsteps moved, descending the stairs, slow and measured. And I heard the person on the stairs. I stayed frozen, unable to move, until I could call my boyfriend. I don't know how long I stayed there immobile, but eventually I called my boyfriend, and thankfully he came to the rescue. He arrived, his face pale as he checked the house. At first I genuinely thought maybe I was going crazy because, I didn't see anything, and I couldn't believe that it really happened. But he found proof. Scratches on the kitchen window frame, signs of forced entry. But my boyfriend confirmed later that they had definitely forced the door or the windows in the kitchen open, so they were really there. Someone had been inside, waiting, maybe for me to sleep. They were silently waiting for me to sleep, I guess, so that they could get out of my house. I'd felt safe, but I wasn't. I was home alone feeling completely safe, but the whole time I wasn't. The trauma sank deep, a shadow I couldn't shake. It was traumatic, and I could barely stay alone somewhere without freaking out. Even now, living alone, I check locks obsessively, jump at every noise. To this day, I do live alone, and I'm constantly paranoid that someone is trying to break in. Worse, nothing was taken. Not my mom's MacBook, her jewelry, my PS4, or Dad's gaming setup. But the worst part is that they didn't take anything. My mom's MacBook and jewelry were there. My PS4 was there. My Dad's gaming setup. Everything was so easy to take, but they didn't take a thing. It wasn't about theft. I can't stop thinking that they were here for, another reason. My life was an open book then, splashed across Snapchat for 5,000 strangers. You also have to know that at that time I was very active on Snapchat. I used to post every day, and I used to tell and put my story up every day as well. So the 5K of unknown followers that I had on social media, they knew everything about me at this time. I posted my routines, my plans, my absences. And I personally think that, but it must have been related. Someone knew I'd be alone. Since then, I have stopped my activities on Snapchat, and thankfully, nothing else has happened. But the fear lingered, grew roots. I started noticing things after. Scratches on the window that weren't there before. A faint smell of cigarette smoke in the hall some mornings, though no one in the house smoked. Was it one person, or more, tracking me through my posts? I deleted my social media, but the paranoia didn't fade. Every creak in the house felt like those footsteps, every shadow a figure waiting. My boyfriend installed new locks, a security system, but it wasn't enough. I'd wake at night, certain I heard breathing outside my door. I researched the neighborhood, digging for answers. A string of break-ins had hit nearby, but always with theft. TVs, cash, jewelry. My case was different, personal. I found a forum post about watchers, people who enter homes not to steal, but to observe, to control. The thought made my skin crawl. Had they been in my room before, watching me sleep, knowing my every move from Snapchat? I changed my number, moved to a new place, but the memory of that morning, of being hunted in my own home, never left. Some threats don't need to take anything to break you. The watcher in the tree line. The house stood alone, its gravel road a thin thread to the world beyond. A 12-year-old, home alone with their younger siblings, stepped into the kitchen to make popcorn as dusk settled over their rural home. What eyes watched from the shadows of the tree line? The air grew heavy, the quiet of the countryside suddenly sharp, as if the night itself held its breath. Had danger always lurked this close, or had it just arrived? They glanced out the window, and their hearts stopped. A junky car, its license plates taped over, was parked in the tree line, hidden from the road, its presence alien in their familiar yard. The vehicle was no neighbor's. It was wrong, deliberate, a predator in wait. The child, sharp and aware, backed away from the glass, their pulse racing. Who was out there, and what did they want? A figure sat inside, motionless, staring at the house. The darkness seemed to lean closer, the house no longer a sanctuary. From the shadowed hallway, the child saw a lone man in the car, his gaze fixed on the house, the lights off, his intent unreadable. His stillness was worse than movement, a promise of something unspoken. They locked the front and back doors, fingers trembling, the bolt sliding home with a reassuring click. Would the locks hold, or was the danger already inside? They moved with purpose, fear cloaked in calm. The child told their siblings to play in their room, shutting the door to keep them safe, then tried calling their mother, but she didn't answer. The phone felt useless, a lifeline severed. Peering through the curtains, they watched the man, his silhouette a stain against the dusk. How long had he been there? Planning. Waiting. The house creaked, its walls suddenly fragile, the rural quiet a trap. Time stretched, each second a weight on their chest. Another car's headlights swept the road, and the man started his engine, speeding away down the gravel, leaving only dust and dread. The child exhaled, but the fear lingered, a cold knot in their gut. They stayed with their siblings, curtains drawn, the night outside now an enemy. What had he wanted, and would he return? The house felt different after that, its safety a lie exposed. The child replayed the man's stare, the taped-over plates, the car's sudden flight. They'd always been watchful, but now every shadow held a threat. Was he a thief, a drifter, or something worse? The rural road, once a comfort, now felt like a lure, drawing strangers to their doorstep. Had he seen them through the window, a child alone with two others? They told their parents when they returned, words tumbling out in a rush. But the adults dismissed it, their laughter cutting deeper than the fear. The parents called the child dramatic, refusing to believe in the car or the man, despite their insistence. The child's certainty burned, unvalidated, a truth only they carried. They checked the locks again that night, their siblings asleep, oblivious to the danger that had passed. What if no one believed them next time? The days that followed were tense, the tree line a constant presence. The child watched it from every window, expecting the car's return. Neighbors, when asked, knew nothing of a junkie beater, their shrugs fueling the child's unease. They began to notice details, tire tracks in the gravel, a branch snapped near the yard's edge. On X, They found stories of strangers staking out rural homes, their motives unclear. Was their house marked, or was it chance? They changed their habits, keeping the curtains closed, the doors locked even in daylight. The siblings, too young to understand, complained about missing movie night, but the child stood firm. They carried the phone everywhere, its silence a reminder of their mother's unanswered calls. The house was their fortress now, its walls a thin shield against the unknown. The child wondered about the man, his face hidden, his purpose a void. Had he fled for good, or was he waiting, just out of sight? Years later, the memory remained, sharp as a blade. The child, now grown, still checked the locks, a habit born that night. They were glad they'd locked the doors, knowing something sinister had been close. The tree line stayed with them, a symbol of the world's hidden dangers. In quiet moments, they felt his stare, distant but unyielding. And they wondered, had he seen them, or had he seen something else? Something only a child could sense. The whistle in the woods, deep in the heart of Appalachia, where the trees guard secrets older than the hills. A single sound can unravel your courage. I stood in the dark woods behind my grandparents' isolated West Virginia home, the air thick with an unseen presence. The forest didn't welcome me. It watched, its silence a warning I couldn't ignore. My flashlight's beam cut through the shadows, but it revealed nothing, only deepening the dread. Then it came, a whistle, sharp, musical. Too close, too human. It wasn't a bird, not an animal. It was something else, and it wanted me to hear it. I'm 23, live in New York City, but my grandparents live in rural West Virginia, the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors, an hour away. My grandfather, Robert, had surgery on his hip. My grandmother, Muriel, is very old, couldn't take care of him. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast. I was the closest. They asked me to help. I agreed to come for 2 weeks while he recovered. My days were simple. Help Robert with stairs, fetch his meds, and walk their blue heeler, Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky morning and night through the woods behind their property. But because of the surgery, that fell to me. I hated those woods, always had, ever since I was a kid. As a kid, I never liked those woods. Me and my cousins got creeped out. It felt off. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches clawing at the sky, whispering things I couldn't understand. For a week, I managed. For the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if it was creepy. The routine was bearable, Rocky trotting ahead, my flashlight bouncing off gnarled roots. But the forest never felt right. Its silence too heavy, its shadows too deep. Then, one night, everything changed. I was walking him through the forest, the sun setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything normal until I heard a strange whistle, only 20 yards away. Both me and the dog stopped dead, looked toward the whistling. I shined my flashlight in that direction. Didn't see anything. Assumed it was a bird. But it wasn't a bird. No nocturnal creature in these hills made a sound so melodic, so deliberate. Looking back, it wasn't a bird. No nocturnal birds whistle out there. It sounded more musical. The dog was spooked, wouldn't stop staring, kept trying to back up. Rocky's hackles rose, his eyes fixed on the darkness, a low rumble in his throat. Whatever or whoever it was whistled again. The dog started going crazy. The sound was closer, sharper, like a tune from a forgotten song. I decided I didn't want to stay, yanked the dog's leash. We bolted out of the woods, straight back home. My heart pounded as we ran. the forest's edge a distant promise. When we got back, I told my grandparents what happened. They seemed spooked. My grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I said I didn't. She seemed relieved. Told me I didn't hear anything, to ignore it. I asked why. She wouldn't tell me. Just said I didn't hear anything. Her eyes were wide. Her voice tight, like she'd heard that sound before. I went to bed, terrified, wondering why she was so freaked out. Sleep didn't come easy, the whistle echoing in my mind. A melody I couldn't shake. The next morning, she told me to walk Rocky around the house, not through the woods. Every night, I took Rocky for laps around the house. The house felt safer, its walls a barrier against whatever lurked in the trees. I followed her advice, circling the property, Rocky's leash taut as he sniffed the grass. But the forest loomed, its darkness spilling over the edge of the yard. Near the end of my stay, it happened again. I was taking the dog for laps, heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage, only 10 yards from the house. The sound was unmistakable, closer now, mocking my caution. I immediately took the dog back inside, locked the doors, put my earbuds in, ignored any more whistling, like my grandmother told me. I drowned out the night with music, but the fear lingered, a weight I couldn't lift. My grandparents never spoke of it again, their silence louder than words. I asked Robert once, but he changed the subject, his hands trembling. I called friends, searching for answers. Some friends said it was a skinwalker, but that's a Navajo thing. There's almost no Navajo in West Virginia. My girlfriend asked her Muslim parents from Yemen. They said whistling at night is a sign a jinn is nearby. I didn't know what to believe. Skinwalkers, jinn, or something else. I don't know what it was, but it had my grandparents legitimately scared. Appalachia's reputation for the strange wasn't new, but this was my first taste. Raw and real. I left soon after, the whistle a memory I couldn't bury. The forest stayed with me, its song a warning I'd never forget. Back in New York, I dug into Appalachian lore, finding tales of whistling spirits, entities that lured people into the woods, never to return. Some called them guardians, others predators, tied to the land's ancient wounds. I found a forum where locals shared similar stories. Whistles in the night, dogs reacting. No source found. One old post mentioned a ritual. Never whistle back, or you invite it closer. My grandmother's warning made sense now, her fear a lesson from years in those hills. I called her, but she brushed it off, her voice distant. Rocky's growls haunted me, his instincts sharper than mine. I wondered if he'd seen something I couldn't, a shape in the dark. I haven't returned to West Virginia since. The city's noise drowns out the memory, but not the unease. I keep a flashlight by my bed, check the locks twice. My girlfriend notices my jumpiness, but I don't tell her everything. I search the property online, finding old records of the land. Disappearances, unexplained noises, stories buried in time. The woods were older than my grandparents, older than the town, and they held their secrets tight. I don't walk dogs anymore, don't trust the dark, and sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I hear it. A faint whistle, calling me back to the trees. The black mist. You wake up in the dead of night, your room cloaked in silence. Something's there, in the corner. A shapeless darkness, heavier than shadow. It's not your imagination. It's real, watching you. You're not scared, but its presence presses against your chest. You've seen it before, years ago, and now it's back, closer than ever. What is it, and why does it follow you? You've lived in many houses, but this thing has appeared twice. 4 or 5 years ago, in a house built in the 1920s 1920s or 1930s. You woke up in the basement. You struggled with sleep from ages 8 to 16, often waking between 1 and 4 a.m. That night, a black mist hung in the corner of your room, thick enough to block sight. You weren't scared, just aware it was there. You shined your phone's flashlight, and when you turned it off, the mist was gone. It felt alive, not threatening, but present, like it knew you. You brushed it off, blaming insomnia, and moved on with life. Now, at 20, you're in a new house, built within the last 10 years. After a 12-day trip, you woke up in the middle of the night, something you hadn't done in years. To your left, a black mist loomed beside your bed, 4 to 5 feet tall. Again, you weren't scared. You turned over, whispered, "I'm safe," and something else you can't recall, then fell back asleep. The mist didn't move, didn't speak, but it watched, its weight lingering. You've been stressed, but revitalized from visiting family, wondering if it's an apparition or something else. Your calm reaction feels strange, like you're connected to it. The mist haunts your thoughts. You're curious about what it could be, asking for ideas. Is it a ghost, a manifestation of stress, or something older? You dig into the old house's history, learning it was built on land once owned by a family who lost everything in the Great Depression. Whispers of tragedy, grief, loss cling to the property, like the mist itself. The new house feels different, modern, clean, but you find records of a fire in the area decades ago. The land scarred before your home was built. Could the mist be tied to the land, not the houses? You start noticing patterns. The mist appears when you're vulnerable, exhausted, stressed, or after long trips. You experiment, leaving a salt line by your bed, burning sage, but nothing changes. One night, you wake to find it closer, almost touching you, its edges pulsing like a heartbeat. You whisper, "I'm safe," and it fades, but not before you feel a tug. Like it's trying to tell you something. You're not scared, but you're not alone. You confide in a friend who suggests it's a guardian spirit, but you're not so sure. The black mist knows you, and it's not done with you yet. The Hatted Shadow. The room was a fortress of shadows, the bunk bed creaking under our weight as the night pressed in. My brother and I, kids sharing a cramped bedroom, had claimed our spots. My brother and I slept in the same room in a bunk bed. I was the heavier one, so I took the bottom bunk, leaving him the top. I was always a heavy guy, so I'd sleep on the bottom and he slept up top. We were asleep, lost in dreams, when something pulled me awake. We're both asleep. A streetlight's glow seeped through the curtains, casting a pale haze at the foot of our bed. At the foot of our bed is a window. There's a streetlight across the road, so there was literally always some light coming through the curtains. I felt it before I saw it. A presence, heavy, watching. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding. I'm not entirely sure what woke me up, but when I did, I just had that overwhelming feeling of somebody watching me. There, at the bed's end, stood a figure. I wake up and open my eyes, and at the foot of my bed is a literal shadow person. Its outline was stark, a pitch-black silhouette against the glowing curtain. You could very clearly see the person's outline with the lit-up curtain behind him, like absolutely pitch black against a white lit-up cloth curtain. A hat, like a trucker's cap, crowned its head. He was definitely wearing a hat, but like just a hat, like a baseball sort of trucker-shaped hat. Its hand gripped something long, menacing. The shape of a firefighter's axe gleamed faintly, its blade catching the light. He was also holding what looked like a firefighter's wood-cutting axe. It was pretty long, I recall. I froze, breath trapped, staring at the unmoving figure. I had just kind of sat there for a good minute, completely. Frozen in fear. It didn't stir, didn't breathe. Just stood there, a void in the room. He didn't move at all, that I can remember. Then, a voice, deep, gravelly, like stones grinding, shattered the silence. After a minute or two, in the deepest and most gruff voice that I've ever heard, he just says one day, "Terror took over." I dove under the covers, heart hammering, my child's mind blank with panic. At that, I flipped and hid under the covers, because as a child, I couldn't think of anything else that I could do. Seconds stretched into eternity, the blanket my only shield. After another minute passed. Then, a trembling voice from above. I just hear my brother's shivering voice say, "John, did you see that too?" I whispered back, confirming the shared nightmare. I answered that I had. We lay there, silent, waiting for the figure to return. And we just kind of laid there, in silence. And eventually, we both drifted off back to sleep, I guess. Sleep came, but the memory didn't fade. We swore we saw it, clear as day, even years later. We both swear that we remember it. What was it? A demon? An intruder? A reaper? Theories we've tossed around go from just a straight-up demon or evil spirit to a literal home intruder to a grim reaper type thing. The one day haunted me, a promise or a threat. That last one always seemed to make sense to me because of what it said to us. But it never came back. But it never did show up again for either of us. The room passed to Mom, then me, then back to my brother. No trace of the shadow. My mom took over that room a while after for a few years. Then I took it for a few, and now my brother still lives back at home. And it's his room. So we've all had ample time with nothing happening. The figure's absence didn't erase the fear. That night reshaped us, made us question what we knew. Was it real, or a trick of our minds, cemented by years of retelling? I started noticing things after. Faint scratches on the window frame, a chill in the room that didn't match the season. What did one day mean? A warning? A deadline? I dug into local stories, finding whispers of a figure in a hat, seen by others always at night, always silent until it spoke. Some called it a guardian, others a harbinger, tied to the land our house stood on. We never saw it again, but the room felt different. My brother kept a bat by his bed. I checked the curtains nightly. Every creak in the house echoed that voice. Every shadow felt like it could take form. I moved out, but my brother stayed, claiming the room was just a room. But I saw his eyes flicker when we talked about it, the same fear we'd shared as kids. I asked around, found no answers, just more stories, none matching ours exactly. What was it waiting for, and why us? The axe, the hat, the voice, they lingered, a puzzle with no edges, a shadow that never fully left. The woman at the hallway's end. The house was silent, but it listened. A young child, lying in their shared bedroom, heard footsteps echoing on the hardwood hallway, slow and deliberate. What walked those boards in the dead of night? The air grew thick, the darkness pressing against their skin like a living thing. Had the house always harbored this presence, or had it come for them? Their heart pounded, the sound of each step a drumbeat in their chest. Then, she appeared. A vision from a nightmare. At the hallway's end, an old woman in a white dress, lipless with snarling teeth and black eyes, floated without feet. her head turning slowly between the child's room and their mother's. Her gaze was a void, her movements mechanical, like a pendulum counting down to something unknown. The child froze, breath caught, as her head oscillated, unhurried, deliberate. What did she seek? This specter who defied the laws of flesh. She turned, and the world held its breath. The woman walked away, her footsteps fading into silence, leaving the child trembling in their bed. The house swallowed her, but her presence lingered, a chill that seeped into the walls. The child whispered to their older brother, sharing the room, his voice sharp with fear. "He saw her too, didn't he?" The brother, awake, hissed for silence, urging the child to hide under the blanket, his own terror palpable. But was it real, or a shared delusion born of the night? Years passed, and the memory became a dream, a story too vivid to be true. The brother, when asked later, recalled nothing, convincing the child it was a vivid dream that haunted them alone. Yet the woman's face, those teeth, those eyes, clung to them, a shadow in their quiet moments. They never spoke of it, burying the fear deep, until a conversation with their mother shattered the illusion. What truth waited in her words, locked away for decades? The mother's voice was a key, unlocking dread. She described the same woman, seen in the same hallway, looking back and forth, confirming the apparition was real, not a dream. The child, now grown, felt their stomach twist, the world tilting under the weight of certainty. She had been there, watching, choosing. How many nights had she stood unseen, her black eyes tracing their sleeping forms? The house, once a home, was now a stage for something eternal. The memory of the woman reshaped the narrator's world. They saw the hallway in their mind, its hardwood gleaming under an unseen moon, her white dress a stain against the dark. The house, called the Caramel House for its warm exterior, held no warmth in that moment. Was she bound to it, or had she followed them from some older place? The narrator began to notice patterns in their life. A door creaking open, a shadow flitting at the edge of sleep. Had she ever truly left? They dug into the house's past, seeking answers. A neighbor, ancient and knowing, spoke of a woman who'd lived there long ago, a recluse who died alone, her name lost to time. Her story was vague, but the details chilled. A white dress, a restless spirit, a gaze that lingered. Was she the one, trapped in a loop of searching? The narrator found no records, only whispers on X of similar figures. Women in white, watchers of the night. Each tale was a mirror, reflecting their fear. The brother's denial gnawed at them. He'd seen her, his voice trembling that night. Yet now he claimed ignorance. Had fear erased his memory, or had the woman chosen who to haunt? The narrator wondered if she'd appeared to others, her footsteps a secret kept by the house. They avoided the hallway in later visits, its open mouth a reminder of her gaze. What did she want? And why had she looked at them? The mother's confirmation changed everything. She'd seen the woman too, her words heavy with the weight of years unspoken. The narrator and their mother compared notes, their voices low, as if the woman might hear. The house had been a crossroads, a place where the veil thinned. They began to pray at night, a habit born of unease, their words a shield against the dark. But the woman's eyes followed them, a memory that refused to fade. Now, the narrator carries her with them, a passenger in their soul. They believe, not in ghosts but in her. Real, undeniable, a truth that reshaped their world. The questions linger. How often had she watched them sleep, her presence a silent vigil? The house is gone, sold or abandoned, but its hallway lives in them. In the quiet, they feel her gaze, distant but unyielding. And they wonder, was she guarding them or claiming them all those nights ago? The Lost Hour in Rising Star. In the vast emptiness of rural Texas, where time bends and reality frays, a single drive can trap you in a place that doesn't exist. I was cruising through the flatlands, my car humming along a lonely highway, when I entered a town that felt like a mirage. Rising Star, it was called, but there was no light here, only a void that swallowed sound and sense. The streets were empty, the air too still, and my phone's clock betrayed me, ticking forward in ways it shouldn't. Something was wrong, and the mural on that old drugstore wall, a man with snakes spilling from his mouth, told me to keep driving. I left, but Rising Star didn't let me go, and its shadow haunts me still. I was living in College Station, Texas, the job market rough for anyone outside academia. I landed a job as a sales consultant for a digital marketing company. After I started, I found out my job was door-to-door sales, selling digital marketing packages and phone book ads to small businesses. The company was terrible, the managers pure evil, the product awful. I was looking for a new job, but needed a paycheck. The work was soul-crushing, each rejection a reminder of my desperation. They sprang somethings on us. We'd spend half the year in College Station, the other half in a hotel in Abilene, selling phone book ads. My wife was understanding. I'd come home on weekends. I had promising leads for work. Figured I'd only need a month there. She was my anchor, her patience a lifeline, as I packed for the trip. The first time heading out, I enjoyed the view. Small towns, interesting landscapes. I looked at my phone partway through. I was making way better time than expected, an hour ahead of schedule. I was certain I'd checked my phone before. That hadn't been the case. The clock on the dash confirmed it. The road stretched on, dotted with faded signs and quiet fields. But that time jump nagged at me, a glitch I couldn't explain. I was pulling through a town called Rising Star. I'm a horror and occult fan. Made a mental connection to Lucifer. Morning Star. Chuckled. The name felt like a dark joke, fitting for a place that seemed to hum with unease. It was a small town, despite broad daylight. I saw no one, not a single person. I slowed down, looked into windows. Nothing. Summer. No kids playing in yards, saw parked cars. No one driving or sitting in one. The silence was oppressive. The streets a stage abandoned mid-scene. I passed an old brick drugstore. On the side was a mural of a man with snakes dangling from his mouth. It creeped me out, especially with my Lucifer connection. The mural's colors were vivid, the snakes too real, their eyes seeming to follow me. Part of me was tempted to stop, see if I could find a human being. But that mural changed my mind. It wasn't just art. It was a warning, a signal to keep moving. As soon as I left that town, I looked at my phone, my clock. They were an hour ahead of where they'd been before. 2 hours gone, stolen by a town that felt like a trap. I gripped the wheel, my heart racing, the highway a lifeline back to reality. Rising Star faded in my rear view, but its weight clung to me, heavy and cold. I did research later, an innocent explanation about the mural. A local celebrity who participated in rattlesnake roundups had a Guinness record. His name was a footnote, the explanation hollow against what I'd felt. That time fluctuation, the eerie absence of people, it didn't feel right. It still haunts me. I regularly have nightmares about that place, which is strange. In my dreams, the mural moves, the snakes hiss, and the town is endless, its streets looping back. I took a different route from then on. Sue found a new job. The job was a fresh start, but Rising Star lingered, a scar on my mind. I joke with friends I'll be back there one day, won't come back. It's half a joke, because deep down, I fear it's true. The town isn't done with me, I told my wife, her eyes wide as I described the mural, the missing hours. She suggested a glitch, a phone error, but the dash clock matched, and her voice wavered. I searched online, finding whispers of Rising Star, travelers reporting time skips, empty streets, a town that felt off. Some called it cursed, others a glitch in reality, tied to old Texas legends of places that weren't quite here. I found a grainy photo of the mural, the snakes too lifelike, the man's grin unsettling. I closed my laptop, my pulse quickening. I asked a friend, a folklorist, about it. He spoke of thin places, where the veil between worlds frays, time and space bending. Rising Star fit the bill, its silence a doorway I'd stumbled through. I avoid that route now, stick to highways with noise and life. My new job keeps me busy, but I check my phone's clock too often, afraid it'll jump. The nightmares come weekly, the mural's snakes coiling around me, the town's streets swallowing my car. I wake sweating, the silence of my apartment too close to Rising Stars. I bought a new phone, reset the clock, but it doesn't help. The town marked me, its pull stronger than distance. I told a coworker, half expecting laughter, but he nodded, said his uncle avoided Rising Star too, called it a place that takes. I don't drive alone at night anymore, don't trust small towns, and sometimes, in the quiet, I feel it. Rising Star, waiting, its clock's ticking for me. The footprints on the ceiling. You're 19, alone in a new flat, lying in bed when the silence breaks. Heavy footsteps thunder down the hallway, stopping right outside your door. You wait, heart pounding, but nothing comes. Night after night, an unseen presence breathes beside you, close enough to feel its weight. Then you see them, footprints on the ceiling, impossibly high, marking you as theirs. This place isn't yours, and it never was. You were 19, renting a flat, living alone for the first time. On the first night, lying in bed, you heard loud footsteps running up the hallway, stopping just outside your bedroom door. You sat up, expecting the door to open, but silence followed. The air felt thick, like something was waiting. A few nights later, you heard breathing beside your bed, near your head, but no one was there. Every few nights, the breathing returned, in any room, day or night. It wasn't your imagination. It was real, deliberate. You tried ignoring it, telling yourself it was the old building's quirks, but the presence grew bolder. One night, a friend stayed over, watching TV in the living room. The breathing started, and he asked, "Is that you?" You replied, "No, that just happens sometimes." His face paled, and you both sat frozen, the sound circling you. You stayed only until your 6-month lease ended, sleeping at friends' houses when you could. On moving day, you saw footprints on the ceiling, too high for anyone to reach. They were bare, human, fresh, like they'd been watching you all along. It was a freaky place, and you were glad to leave. The flat left scars. You researched its history, digging into old tenant records. The building, built in the 1920s, had a grim past. A tenant in the 40s vanished, leaving only rumors of madness. Some said he spoke of watchers in the walls. You found no answers, but the breathing followed you in dreams, faint but persistent. You moved far away, but every creak in a new house made you check the ceiling. You still wonder what it was, sharing the story sparingly. Your friend never visited again, and you never went back. The footprints are gone, but their weight remains, a warning from a place that never let you go. The face in the bay window. The storm was a living thing, its wind howling through the Michigan night, rattling the windows of my patrol vehicle as I drove toward the old house. I was a security guard for a sprawling furniture manufacturer, my nights spent roaming factory plants and office buildings. I worked security for a large office or furniture manufacturer in Michigan. I did mainly foot and vehicle patrols of primarily the 3 factory plants, but occasionally the corporate office buildings. But the historic home, a company showpiece, was different. And an older home that the company bought and refurbished, the company would use the home for tours for the public, and they would use it for some wow factor for potential buyers. They flew in to make a sale. Its elegance hid something unsettling, a weight I felt every time I stepped inside. The house was a masterpiece, but it didn't feel like home. Designed by a renowned architect, its bay windows and stained glass gleamed with early 20th century grandeur. For more reference, this home was designed by a famous architect and is known for its large bay windows and painted glass. The home it was built in the early 1900s. No deaths were recorded here. No tragedies. As far as I'm aware, no one ever died in the home or anything like that. Yet stories swirled among guards and tour guides, lights flickering upstairs, dolls in the nursery shifting places when no one was around. And fellow security guards had told me about weird occurrences that had happened around the house over the years. The main story was about them seeing the light on upstairs and a black silhouette of a figure standing in the window, just watching them. There were also stories from the tour guides of the home that stated that the dolls in the nursery would be found in different locations from when they last saw them, when nobody else was entering that room. A fault in the fire alarm sent me there. A storm had knocked out power, tripping the system, and I was dispatched to reset it. We had a bit of a storm rolling in. The control operator received a fire alarm fault from the fire panel at the home, and when compared to prior alarms that night and the weather that we were experiencing, it was presumed that the power had gone out. And when I came back on set off the fire alarm fault, so I was dispatched as a precaution to ensure everything was okay and to reset the fire alarm panel. I arrived, the house looming in the rain, its windows dark but expectant. I made my way into the home. I had been there a handful of other times. I headed to the basement, where the alarm panel waited. Anyways, I made my way to the basement, which is where the fire alarm panel was located. The basement was a maze of shadows, the panel's lights blinking erratically. I reset it, but my radio failed. Static and strange noises drowning my attempts to contact the control operator. I reset the panel and attempted to radio to the control operator to see if the fault had reset. My radio was completely just refusing to operate. It was making weird noises when I tried to key it up and kept losing signal. My phone was no better, the call cutting out, feedback screeching until it dropped to SOS mode. I didn't think too much of it and pulled my phone out and called them. Instead, I was able to establish a phone call, but it kept cutting out and had a lot of feedback until the call finally dropped and my phone went into SOS. Unease crept in, but I decided to walk through the house, flashlight in hand. In any case, I decided to do a bit of a walkthrough of the home. I was already there and wanted to kill some time anyway. The house felt alive, its silence sharper than the storm outside. I moved upstairs, through the kitchen and dining room, into the living room with its massive windows. I went back upstairs, walked through the kitchen into the dining room, and into the living room. The large windows noted earlier are primarily in the living room. The old button-operated lights stayed off. I relied on my flashlight, The lights were old in the home, and they were operated by buttons on the walls, and not switches. But I elected to just use my flashlight instead. Sweeping the beam across the room, I caught a glimpse in the bay window's reflection. An old man, seated just feet away, staring with an emotionless face. I walked into the living room and did a quick once-over of the room with my flashlight, and for a split second in the reflection of the bay window, I could have sworn that I saw an old man seated in the chair, sitting less than good away from me. He was staring at me. Through the reflection, with an eerily emotionless face, I spun around, heart racing, but the chair was empty. I sort of doubled back while questioning what I just saw. But the image was now burned into my mind when I looked back there. There was nothing. The image seared into me, his hollow eyes unblinking. I immediately felt uneasy though, and I paused momentarily. I forced myself to continue, heading toward the staircase beside the living room, but elected to continue my walkthrough of the home. The staircase was beside the living room, and went up to a landing maybe about 10 feet long, which proceeded to another staircase to the second floor. On the landing, a wave of dread hit. Every hair stood on end, my face drained cold, a primal sense of danger screaming to flee. I proceeded up the stairs and stepped into the landing, and I cannot describe the feeling that rushed over me into words. It was like something out of the movies. All of the hair on my body stood up and my face went cold, as all the blood just rushed away, and I had an immediate sense of danger. I sprinted out, leaping into my vehicle and speeding away, the house shrinking in my rear view. Needless to say, I sprinted out of that home to my patrol vehicle and sped off without looking back. My colleagues laughed at the security footage of my escape, but I stood by what I saw. They eventually pulled the video footage of me sprinting out of the house, and it was a bit of a joke for a while, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. The house wasn't just old. It held something that watched. That night changed me. I avoided the house after, volunteering for factory patrols instead. But the old man's face followed me, appearing in dreams, always silent, always staring. I dug into the house's history, finding no deaths but plenty of rumors. Workers who quit after feeling watched. Visitors who swore they saw figures in the glass. Was it the architect's design, trapping something in those windows, or something older? Drawn to the house's grandeur, the dolls, the silhouettes, my reflection. They felt connected, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I left the job eventually, but the story spread among the guards. I wondered if new hires heard my tale, if they felt the same chill on the landing. Some claimed they did. Flickering lights, footsteps in empty halls. The house stood as a monument, beautiful but wrong, its windows hiding more than they showed. I drive a different route now, avoiding that street. Every reflection in a window makes me pause, searching for that face, wondering if it's still waiting, watching for someone new to step inside. The hag at the glass. The woods were alive, their shadows curling like fingers around the house. A young girl, napping with her father on a pallet in their Central Texas living room, woke to a sight beyond the glass panes overlooking the patio. What stood in the vast, untamed acreage of the brushy woods. The air was heavy, the silence of the afternoon broken by a presence that didn't belong. Had the forest sent a visitor? Or had it always been there? Waiting, she opened her eyes, and the world turned cold. Outside the window, a woman stood, draped in rags and pelts, her hair matted with leaves and twigs, her face ancient and wrong. Her eyes were pits, her skin like bark, as if the woods had birthed her. The girl's breath caught, her heart a drum against her ribs. What was this thing? This creature of cloth and earth? The woman's gaze locked onto hers, unblinking, eternal. Then, the impossible happened. The woman's mouth opened, wider and wider, stretching beyond human limits, a gaping maw that swallowed light. It was no mouth, it was a void, a portal to something older than the trees. The girl's scream tore free, her hands shaking her father awake. "Look, she's there!" She pointed, desperate, but when they both looked, the woman was gone, the patio empty. The glass reflected only their fear, the woods beyond silent, mocking. The girl's father dismissed it, his voice soft but firm. He insisted it was a dream, but the girl knew the truth, her certainty unshakable, a memory carved into her soul. She'd seen it, felt its gaze, known its hunger. The house, isolated on its sprawling land, no neighbors for miles, seemed to hum with secrets. Had the woman come before, unseen, her steps silent in the night? The girl's fear grew, a seed planted deep. She carried the vision, a weight that never lifted. Years later, her friend, the narrator, believed her, searching for answers in tales of forest hags and ancient spirits. Nothing matched, not Baba Yaga, not the witches of lore. What was the widening mouth, the rags, the twigs? The brushy woods held their secret, and the girl, now gone, left only her story. Was the woman still out there, watching, waiting for another to see? The house was no longer a haven, it was a threshold. The narrator, haunted by their friend's tale, pictured the glass panes, the patio, the woods stretching into the unknown. They scoured Central Texas legends, finding whispers of beings tied to the land, but none with that gaping maw. Was she a spirit, a guardian, or something cursed, bound to the forest? The acreage, vast and unyielding, seemed to guard her truth, its trees whispering in a language lost to time. They spoke with locals, hoping for clarity. An old rancher, his face carved by years, mentioned a figure seen in the brushy woods, a woman of rags, glimpsed by hunters, always near dusk. She was no ghost, he said, but something older, born of the earth's anger. Her mouth, he'd heard, could swallow souls, though he laughed it off as folklore. The narrator shivered, the girl's story echoing in his words. Had others seen her, or was she selective, choosing her witnesses? The narrator searched online, finding posts on X about strange sightings in Central Texas. Lights, creatures, but nothing quite like her. The woods were a hot spot, though, their depths hiding more than bobcats and deer. They wondered about the house, still standing, its current owners unaware of the woman's gaze. Did she still stand at the glass, her mouth a warning? The narrator began to dream of her, the rags, the twigs, the void that was her face. Was the girl's story a summons, pulling them into her orbit? They visited the house once, standing where the patio met the woods. The glass was cold, the forest silent, but the air felt charged, as if the woman lingered just out of sight. They found no traces, no rags, no twigs, but the feeling remained, a pressure that urged them to leave. The brushy woods were her domain, and they were intruders. The narrator left, the girl's story heavier now, a truth they couldn't unlearn. She was out there, and she knew they knew. The narrator lives with her now, a shadow in their thoughts. They believe not because of proof, but because of the girl's eyes, wide with truth as she told the tale. The woods of Central Texas are vast, their secrets buried deep, but the woman at the glass endures. Her mouth opens in their dreams, wider each time, calling. They wonder if she watches still, her rags blending with the trees, her twigs a crown of the wild. And they fear the day they might see her, standing at their own window, waiting. Reddit, Texas, comments, unbox my fellow Texans, what are some creepy stories or... The face at the window, in the stillness of a child's bedroom, where shadows cast long and silent threats, a single glance can scar you for life. I was young, too young to understand the dread that clung to my room each night, but old enough to know it wasn't just my imagination. The window, bare and unyielding, was a portal to something that watched me, waited for me. Its face, gaunt, hollow, inhuman, haunted the glass, always there, always the same. It didn't speak, didn't move, but its presence was a weight, pressing me into fear. And when the lights failed, dimming to a sickly glow, I knew it wasn't alone. I was around 10 or 11. I vividly remember being scared of my bedroom window once it got dark because of what I regularly saw. On numerous occasions, I'd see the same face in the bottom left corner on the outside of the window, just looking in at me. My bedroom was on the second floor. No possibility this was somebody walking by unless they were over 15 feet tall. I'm in my mid-30s now. I can still recall that face. Distinctly male, thin, unkempt hair, skin pulled in as though starved, my best guess. In its 30s or 40s. Oddly, I can't remember the eyes. The face was etched into my mind, a constant in the chaos of my childhood nights. It was always the same face, always in the same position, gave me a sense of dread. Its stare was unrelenting, a silent challenge I couldn't escape. I'd do whatever I could to pretend it wasn't there, glue my eyes to my TV, pick up a book, hoping it would leave me alone. I didn't have curtains, so I didn't have that option. When I called my parents to check, they never saw anything, passed it off as my mind playing tricks. Their dismissal hurt, but the dread was real, a cold weight that lingered long after the face vanished. That dread stayed with me for the rest of the night until I fell asleep. When I did sleep, I'd have upsetting dreams almost every night, dreams of being chased, in many cases, killed. I spoke to my therapist about a recurring dream where I was chased, thrown off a bridge I crossed on my walk to school. They didn't read much into it. The dreams were vivid, relentless, my screams trapped in my throat as I fell. To this day, I have issues sleeping. My partner says I whimper in my sleep as if frightened. I can't sleep through a full night, waking up 2 or 3 times for no reason. The nights are still broken, the fear a shadow that never left. I still avoid going past windows at night unless they're drawn. Even then, I feel uneasy. The habit is instinct now, a reflex born from years of terror. It wasn't just the figure in the window. There were occasions I'd turn on the room's light. It wouldn't work. It turned on, but the bulb gave a dim, dark orange glow, barely lighting anything. The first time this happened, I knew something was wrong. Every subsequent time instilled that same anxiety. The light wasn't just broken. It was wrong. Like the room itself resisted illumination. Every time, I'd turn the light off, call my parents. They'd come up, turn it on, everything worked fine. It was only when I was alone that the light played up. Only when I was alone that I saw the figure, as if it didn't want its presence known to anyone else. It was personal, a torment meant for me alone. After several years, my sister became frightened of a gray figure stalking my father around the house. Only she could see. On one occasion, she started screaming, crying. When we calmed her down, she said she saw the figure reaching out, trying to stab my father in the back. Her fear mirrored mine, a confirmation that our house was tainted. I knew something wasn't right, confided in the school chaplain. We weren't religious, but I attended a Catholic high school, didn't know who else to turn to. The chaplain came, blessed the premises, anointed doorways with holy water. It wasn't a full exorcism, but it stopped. We moved house 18 months later. The blessing was a turning point. The air lighter, the face gone. I've lived in several houses since, never experienced the figure again. But I'm still anxious about windows at night. Its effects are real. The fear is a scar, faint but permanent, a reminder of nights I'll never forget. The house was old, its walls steeped in stories we never learned. I asked my parents about its history, but they knew little. A rental, cheap, no questions asked. I searched later, finding vague records of the property, mentions of a tenant who vanished, leaving debts and whispers. No one spoke of a man, gaunt and watching, but the absence felt deliberate, like a truth buried. I told a friend, a paranormal enthusiast, about the face, the light. He suggested an entity, something tied to the house, feeding on fear. I didn't believe in ghosts then, but the chaplain's blessing worked, and that was enough to shake me. My sister's visions of the gray figure haunted me too. Were they the same thing, or something else? Her screams still echo in my memory, a child's terror too real to dismiss. I avoid windows now, keep curtains drawn, lights bright. My partner notices my unease, the way I pause near glass after dark. I've tried therapy again, but the dreams persist. The bridge always there, the fall endless. I found an old sketch I made as a kid, the face in the window, its lines too sharp, too familiar. I burned it, afraid to keep it close. The house is gone, sold years ago, but I drive by sometimes, its windows dark, staring back. I asked a neighbor once, an old woman who'd lived nearby. She frowned, said the house had bad years, but wouldn't say more. Whatever it was, it marked me, its gaze a weight I carry still. And at night, when the world is quiet, I feel it, watching, waiting, just beyond the glass. The embassy predator. You're 20, fresh behind the wheel, driving home from your grandmother's on a sunlit highway. Your car's P-plates scream new driver, an invitation for trouble. A white sedan roars up, its horn blaring, a stranger's angry eyes fixed on you. He flashes a badge, demanding you pull over, his authority unquestionable. Except it's not. You're alone, and he's not police. This isn't a traffic stop, it's a hunt, and you're the prey. You'd just gotten your driver's license, and in your state, P-plates marked you as probationary. Kids called them "pick on me" or "perv magnet plates," a target for creeps, especially in your small white sedan. Female driver, easy mark. You'd visited your grandmother in a nice part of town and were driving home on the highway. No traffic when you turned onto it, but after 300 meters, a loud horn blasted behind you, startling you. You waved for the car to pass, thinking you were too slow, though you weren't. The sedan pulled alongside, matching your speed. A creepy older man in an expensive white sedan honked again, motioning you to pull over or lower your window. His face was hard, impatient, predatory. You mouthed no, but he grew angrier, driving beside you, blocking the highway. Illegal and dangerous. He honked sharply, flashing a black wallet with a silver crest, pointing at it like it gave him power, maybe secret police. His rage was palpable, his eyes boring into you. You hadn't done anything wrong. Your car was freshly serviced. There was no reason for this man to stop you, and fear crept in. You braked hard to read his license plate in case he tried to force you off the road. It read C-Deck. Strange, unfamiliar. In a split second, you veered left off the highway, speeding through back streets you knew from childhood walks with your grandmother. Your heart raced, too scared to check the rear view for a few turns. You lost him, unsure if he followed or sped away. Relief came, but the terror lingered. At work, you shared the story, and an older colleague said, "That's a consular plate from a foreign embassy." It didn't sink in until years later, retelling the tale, when you realized how wrong it felt. Watching true crime videos, you found a YouTube comment about young women vanishing, possibly abducted by embassy workers, shielded by diplomatic immunity. The idea chilled you. Had that man tried to take you in broad daylight? You still question what happened, the memory sharp and unsettling. The highway chase wasn't just a bad driver. It was a near miss with something darker. You started digging, scouring old news clippings and online forums. Consular plates like CDEC were rare, tied to diplomats with privileges that could hide crimes. Stories surfaced, women targeted, cases dropped due to immunity. You remembered his crest, the wallet's glint. Official, but not police. Was he a diplomat or someone exploiting the shield of embassy status? You asked around, but no one in your town recalled similar incidents. The silence was worse than answers. You changed your habits. No more solo drives at dusk. No more trusting strangers' authority. You got a new car. Ditched the P plates, but the memory clung. Every white sedan on the highway made your pulse spike. You confided in your grandmother, who urged you to report it. But without a plate number or clear evidence, the police could do little. You felt exposed, like he was still out there, watching. True crime shows became your lens, each story of a vanished woman echoing your own. What if you hadn't turned left? The man's face haunted you, his anger a warning. You tracked down a retired cop who worked your town back then. He frowned at CDEC, saying consular plates were a gray area. Diplomats could dodge accountability. He'd heard rumors of shady embassy staff, but nothing concrete. You found a forum post about a woman who escaped a similar chase, her pursuer flashing a badge from a foreign consulate. The pattern was there, but the proof wasn't. You started carrying pepper spray, checking your locks twice, avoiding empty roads. The world felt sharper, crueler. Years later, you moved to a new city, but the story followed. You told it at a bar, and a stranger mentioned cold cases tied to embassies, young women, gone without a trace. You Googled diplomatic immunity abductions, finding tales of crimes swept under rugs, perpetrators whisked out of countries. Your stomach churned. Had you dodged a predator cloaked in privilege? You wrote down every detail, hoping to warn others. The man was gone, but his shadow wasn't. You're older now, wiser, but the highway stays with you. You avoid white sedans, flinch at loud horns. The crest, the plate, the rage, they're etched in your mind. You share the story sparingly, a cautionary tale for young drivers. Was he a diplomat, a fraud, or something worse? You'll never know, but you know this. You escaped, and that's enough. The road taught you to trust your instincts, to run when something feels wrong. Somewhere, he's still out there, but you're not his prey anymore. The tapping in the attic. The attic room was my sanctuary, but it never felt safe. At 40, an engineer with a mind for logic, I'd built my life on reason, yet the noises in our Michigan home defied it. For about 2 years now, I occasionally hear what clearly is a hand hitting the wall between my room and the attic. It wasn't vermin. Now, before anyone says chipmunks or insert vermin, please just rule that out. Trust me, I've had the area inspected by pest control so many times, and there is no visible infestation, and traps and baits were set. and to which go undisturbed, even to today. The sound came from the wall separating our bedroom from the void beyond, or maybe the exterior, where the garage roof met the house. If it is not happening from the other side of the bedroom wall in the attic, then the only other place that it can be coming from is the exterior part of the wall. Picture a garage roof line butting up against a house wherein the attic is above the garage. The tapping wasn't alone. It struck at all hours, often when I was alone, though my wife heard it too. This has happened at all hours of the day, mind you, and mostly when I'm alone. But it's happened with my wife in the room too. Our house was alive with sounds. Creaks, thumps, whispers we couldn't trace. As a matter of fact, my wife and I hear noises in the house frequently. We scoured security footage, desperate for answers, but most defied explanation. But we are constantly going back and reviewing our security cameras to explain them away. I would say that a good 80% cannot be explained away. I was no believer in ghosts. Again, trust me, if anyone is looking for a causation, it is me, a semi-non-believer in the paranormal. But there is just no way to explain this stuff. The basement studio was no refuge. I'd be there, headphones on, mic hot, recording tracks. When I'd hear the garage door, kids running upstairs. I've also been in my basement studio, and I've heard my wife and kids come through the garage door. I hear the kids running. I have a hot microphone on, and studio headphones on as well. I can definitely hear. I'd race up, only to find the house empty. But when I go upstairs, they're not home yet. One night, a sharper sound cut through. There was this one night, though, when I heard this tapping on the basement bedroom window. This is a finger tapping a window absolutely clear as day. I knew that sound. Deliberate. Human. I'm 43 years old, and I know what that sounds like. The window was blocked by a fitted painting. No view in or out. I also know that there's nothing near that window to make such a sound I have. That window blocked 100% by a perfectly fitted painting, so no one can actually see in or out. It didn't stop. The tapping persisted for 10 minutes. Steady. Taunting. This goes on for about 10 minutes. I crept to the kids' playroom, where another window sat at an L-shaped corner. So I sort of sneaked down the hall to the kids' playroom. Think of the letter L, and the two windows are equally spaced from the corner. In darkness, I watched, streetlights casting tree shadows. I sneak over, lights are off. I can see very well, except the shadows of the trees being casted by the streetlights. Nothing moved. The tapping ceased. I just sit there for about 10 minutes, but nothing. The tapping seemed to stop too. 2 steps into the hall, it struck again. One sharp tap on the playroom window. I didn't even get 2 steps into the hallway though, and I heard that tap one time on the playroom window. I snapped. Annoyed, I grabbed a gun and rushed outside, certain I'd catch someone. I was annoyed at this point, and so I darted towards the door, grabbing one of the guns en route, and I'm telling you that no one could have escaped my eyesight by then. Nothing. No one. No tracks. No trace. But when I got there was no one there. Cameras showed nothing. I went back and looked at the cameras, and I did everything that I could think of. But there was just nothing. But we caught something else. A deafening stomp from our bedroom above the living room, so forceful the ceiling light flickered. One thing we have caught on camera, though, is this very loud foot stomp from our bedroom. Just above the living room, my wife and kids are visibly startled, as the stomp was so hard that the ceiling light flickered. No explanation held. And again, there is just really no explanation for this. And no, I will not accept house settling, or vermin that is clearly a foot stomping the floor so hard that the lights flickered, the noises multiplied. In my studio, I'd hear my wife's vanity chair rolling in the master bathroom, separated by the laundry room. Now the main level laundry room separates my studio from our master bathroom. On the second level, my wife has a rolling chair at her vanity, and I can hear her rolling around when she's getting ready. I'd text her, asking why she was up, only to find her asleep. I shouldn't, but I do. And well, I've texted her before, asking why she's rolling up and around like that, but there's always no response. And when I check, she's asleep, so it is definitely not her. Then, a man's cane tapping above my studio. Distinct, rhythmic, impossible. Other than that, I hear what sounds like a man tapping his cane on the floor above my studio quite often. I'm an engineer. I know systems, and nothing mechanical explained it. I'm an engineer. I get mechanical systems and knocking, and I can assure you that there are no systems or equipment or associated lines in the vicinity that could cause it. Fear became a constant. Random chills, hairs rising for no reason, shadows flickering in the upstairs hall. Yes, I randomly get scared and hair stand up on my neck occasionally for no reason. Yes, I see something constantly moving in my peripheral, upstairs in the hallway. We slept with the door open, a nightlight burning. But doors close themselves. My sleep with the door open and nightlight on in the hallway is always on, yes. The barn door to the bonus room was closed one morning after I intentionally left it open. Same in the hallway. I feared a presence, something small, malevolent. Whatever this is, I do fear that it's like a small little demon or something. A documentary about haunted engineers echoed too closely. And then my son, 7, spoke. My wife and I watched some documentary on NASA engineers that got haunted by this little guy in the same room my son. 7 at the time actually fell asleep in there that night watching some movie. He woke, claiming he'd heard small human footsteps circling his bed, not the dog's. I woke him up in the morning, and the first thing that he said was, "I woke up earlier. I heard little footsteps walk around the bed," I said. "Oh, it must have been the dog." And he replied, "No, Dad. It was the footsteps of a small human." The garage fires, twice in a week, pushed me further. My garage caught on fire twice that week too, which is weird. No cause, no sense. There's a lot more to this, but this definitely captures the essence of what's happening here. I was no paranormal expert, always skeptical. But this was beyond me. I don't know what to do about any of this because, well, it's definitely not my forte, like I said. I've always been a bit skeptical about this stuff, and so I've just never really looked into it. But now that I'm facing it, I would really like some help. Something was in our house, and it wasn't leaving. I started logging every incident, desperate for patterns. The tapping, the stomps, the cane. They came in waves, quiet for weeks, then relentless. I checked the house's history, but found no deaths, no tragedies, just a quiet suburb, unremarkable. Yet neighbors whispered of oddities, lights flickering in empty homes, footsteps heard in attics. Was it the house or us drawing this thing out? I installed more cameras, motion sensors, but they caught nothing beyond that stomp. My son's words haunted me. Small footsteps, human, circling him. We considered moving, but the house was ours, our life. I contacted a local historian, hoping for answers, but they found nothing. No curses, no rituals. Still, the noises persisted, the air heavier each night. I stopped sleeping in the attic, camping in the living room, gun nearby. My wife prayed. My son drew pictures of a little man he swore he saw. What was it, and why now? The fires, the sounds, the doors. They felt like warnings, but for what? I don't believe in demons, but I don't know what else to call this. Our home, once a haven, was now a cage, and we were not alone. The Vaughan, the ghost town. The streets were empty, a silent maze under a fading sky. A 19-year-old girl, sent by her mother to buy chocolates for baking, walked through a deserted town, the shops shuttered by a strike she hadn't known about. What hunted in the stillness of this ghost town? The air was heavy, the quiet unnatural, as if the world had paused, watching her. Had she stepped into a trap? Or was the danger just beginning? She pressed on, determined, but the shops were barren. Most stores were closed, and those open lacked the chocolate brand her mother needed, the strike turning the area into a lifeless husk. Each empty storefront felt like a warning, the town's pulse gone. She turned for home, choosing the longer route to avoid trespassing, her steps echoing in the void. Why did the silence feel alive, stalking her? Her small frame moved quickly, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down. Then a van appeared, shattering the quiet. A van with two men passed her and stopped meters ahead, blocking the road, their presence jarring in the empty street. Its engine idled, a low growl that set her nerves on edge. She assumed they were lost, needing directions, but their stillness was wrong, predatory. What did they see in her, alone and unguarded? The passenger leaned out, his gaze raking her from head to toe, his smile a blade. Her instincts screamed, the danger now clear. The passenger's creepy smile lingered as he sat back, but the driver mirrored him, leaning out to stare with the same chilling grin. Their eyes were hungry, their faces masks of intent. She quickened her pace, heart pounding, the van's see-through rear window revealing their heated exchange. They were planning, their words a silent threat. She veered toward a narrow path, the shortcut she'd avoided, her only escape. Would it be enough? The van moved, and terror took hold. As she reached the path, the van's back door opened. One man poised to step out, ready to chase. But they slammed it shut and sped off when she changed direction. The tires screeched, their flight too sudden, too tied to her escape. She ran, the path's shadows swallowing her, her breath ragged. Had she outsmarted them, or had they let her go? The town, once familiar, was now a predator's lair, and she its prey. Her escape didn't erase the fear. It sharpened it. The girl stumbled through the neighbor's yard. The shortcut a maze of fences and trees, her lungs burning. She glanced back, expecting the van's headlights, but the road was empty, the silence deafening. Why had they fled so fast, as if her choice had undone their plan? Her thin frame, an easy target, haunted her thoughts. She'd been vulnerable, alone, a prize in their eyes. What had they wanted, and would they return? Back home, she locked the door, her hands shaking as she told her mother. The baker's request, so simple, had nearly cost her everything. Her mother, wide-eyed, checked the windows, the strike's desolation now a threat. The girl replayed their smiles, their synchronized stares, the door's creak as it opened. She searched online, finding stories on X of vans prowling quiet towns, of women vanishing in strike's chaos. Was she a target or a chance they'd seized? The town stayed quiet in the days that followed, but she didn't. She walked with keys between her fingers, her eyes scanning every vehicle, every stranger. The shortcut, once avoided, became her ally, its narrowness a shield. Had the men known the town was empty, their van a hunter in the void? She asked neighbors about strange vehicles, but none had seen the van, their shrugs fueling her unease. It was as if it had never existed, yet it lived in her every step. Her mother stopped sending her on errands alone, the chocolates forgotten. The girl's world shrank, The town's edges now borders she feared to cross. She dreamed of the van, its window revealing not men, but shadows, their smiles stretching into snarls. Were they locals or drifters drawn by the strike's emptiness? She checked the news, fearing reports of others targeted, but found nothing. Only silence, as if the town itself hid their tracks. Had she escaped, or had they chosen to wait? The memory of their gazes clung to her, a predator's mark. She was stronger now, her instincts honed, but the fear remained, a whisper in quiet moments. The ghost town had shown its teeth, and she'd survived, but at a cost. Those smiles, those eyes, they followed her, a reminder of the danger that walks in empty places. She wondered if they watched still, from some shadowed street, their van idling, waiting for another deserted night. And she knew she'd never walk alone again. The Man in the Apron, in the quiet sprawl of a suburban afternoon, where innocence meets the unknown, a child's game can summon something far darker than fun. We were just kids, chasing thrills in the monotony of our neighborhood, unaware of the eyes that watched from behind marble walls. The doorbell's chime was our signal, but that day, it called forth a man who wasn't playing. His shadow loomed, swift and unnatural, his voice a growl that froze us in place. He wasn't chasing us for sport. He was hunting, and we were his prey. His apron, stained with red, held secrets we'd never unravel. But his rage marked us forever. I grew up in the suburbs, outside the occasional play park or sports field. There was nothing to do. Me and my neighbors played knock and run or ding-dong ditch. I have a sister a year younger. My neighbor James was my age, his older sister 14. Played with us sometimes. She thought my sister was cute. I was the biggest coward, my flight instinct stronger than my fight. I'd never ring the doorbell. Always wiggled out, found watching more entertaining. The game was our rebellion, a spark of excitement in the endless rows of identical houses. My cousins came over, one my age, one younger, who couldn't play, one a year older. Daniel, everyone treated him like an adult, though he was 11. He's important to this story. Daniel was bold, his pride a shield I envied. Always ready to prove himself. We were banished outside to play, decided knock and run was a good idea. We usually played on our street, never venturing further than the next street, fearing we'd get lost in the copy-pasted suburban streets. We made our way to the play park on the hill. It sat where a house could have been, could cut across to the next road. On the play equipment, we voted who knocked first. I was picked, got myself out. My older cousin took my place. I hid behind a car, small enough to peer under, my heart racing with borrowed courage. We chose the fanciest house, white marble, a fountain in the front yard, curved driveway. I sat next to a car, small enough to look under, had a clear view of my cousin sneaking to the door, ringing the doorbell 3 times, bolting down the pathway to hide behind cars. The plan was simple: ring, run, laugh. But simplicity shattered in seconds. Before he reached the fence, an older man in a black leather apron, with what I assumed was paint, sprinted after him. I knew something was wrong. This wasn't the usual response. We'd seen angry people, but this was different. He flew down the walkway, threw his hand out to grab Daniel. It didn't feel like something someone his age could do. Scared us all. His speed was unnatural, his movements too precise, like a predator unleashed. I had a clear view, was the first to see. It wasn't until he was on top of Daniel that Daniel noticed. The scream he made will always stick with me. Daniel, proud, always proving himself. His scream of pure terror struck my core. It wasn't just fear. It was primal, a sound that tore through our game. Everyone clued in. Daniel didn't open the high gate, jumped it, saved him from getting hurt. The man took a second to open it. Daniel sprinted down the street, the fastest I'd seen him. The man yelled. His deep, angry voice stopped Daniel in his tracks. They stood in the middle of the road, like an old Western movie, two cowboys at either end. The man marched into Daniel's face. I got a good look. His skin rough leather, few gray hairs, clean-shaven, white pants, white button-up, black leather apron with red paint. He was half a foot from Daniel, berated him. I only made out sick people in there. His apron gleamed, the red stains too vivid, too wrong for paint. Everything about him threw me off. My neighbor and cousin in the bushes felt the same. My neighbor's older sister, T, screamed at him from across the road, gave Daniel a chance to run. Her voice was a lifeline, piercing the tension, pulling us back to action. We all ran. I didn't know where, found myself in the shopping center car park. Panic drove us, our laughter replaced by raw fear, the suburb no longer safe. I waited 30 minutes, watching cars, feeling safer with people. Didn't know if he chased us. Knew I was safe. I made my way back, was the last to return. Daniel ran straight home. T followed. My cousin and neighbor ran around before going home. My mom was missing. I realized she'd been told. She's not afraid of protecting her own. One of the strongest people I know, her absence was a comfort. Her strength, a shield I trusted. When she got back, she was off. Didn't want to talk. Color drained from her face. Her silence was heavy. Her eyes distant, like she'd seen something she couldn't share. We slept at my neighbor's. Mom wanted to talk to Dad about something serious. We knew what. The night was restless, our game a mistake we couldn't unmake. Nothing happened for a while. Mom was more protective. We weren't allowed to play knock and run or go up the road without a parent. It bugged my sister, who loved playing outside. She didn't fully understand what happened. The rules changed, our freedom clipped. The suburb, now a place of shadows. I never forgot Daniel's scream, the way it broke his pride. We stopped talking about that day, but it lingered, a shared scar. I asked T years later, her face paling as she recalled the man's apron, the red stains she swore weren't paint. She said Mom went to the house, confronted him, but came back shaken, refusing to speak. I searched the neighborhood's history, finding rumors of that marble house, odd visitors, late-night lights, whispers of patience inside. No records confirmed it, but the absence felt deliberate, like a cover-up. I drove by once, older now. The fountain dry, the house empty, its windows dark. A neighbor said the man left years ago. No one knew where, no one asked. The apron, the speed, the rage, they didn't fit, like he was more than human, or less. I don't play games anymore, don't trust fancy houses, and sometimes in quiet moments I hear it, Daniel's scream, echoing from a street I'll never forget. The man who hunted us. You're a kid, playing too close to a stranger's yard, unaware you've woken something dangerous. An old man's rage sets off a chain of terror, threats, chases, and a night you're not sure was real. He finds you in stores, waits by creeks, watches your house. His voice, his eyes, his silver SUV, they're everywhere. He wants you silent, and he's not stopping. You're not just hiding anymore. You're running for your life. It started with a mistake. You, your cousins, and neighbor Tay were kids, loud and careless, trespassing on an old man's property near the play park. You knew you'd disturbed him, but you didn't expect what came next. Your mom, furious after Daniel and Tay showed up terrified at your door, marched to confront him. She found him pacing his driveway, not angry or upset, just marching back and forth. She let herself in, and he stopped, staring. He berated her for trespassing. She fired back about scaring kids. Then he said something chilling. "I'll show you what it's like to have someone on your property when you don't want them, and I'll shut those kids up forever." He tried to grab her, but she dodged and left, shaken. Her words, whispered to you years later, burned. "Don't tell your sister, your cousins, anyone." You pressed her for answers, feeling guilty but justified, and she shared the story reluctantly. That was the beginning, but it wasn't the end. A month passed, maybe more, and you thought he was gone. Your parents let you go to the shops alone, a short walk across the road. Your dad sent you for a loaf of bread, handing you a $2 coin. You grabbed the bread from the supermarket's far side, pausing at the toy aisle to admire action figures you couldn't afford. It was your routine, a small joy in your young independence. But then 2 hands shoved you to the ground, the sticky floor bruising your knees. It was him, the old man from up the road. He shouted, his words lost in rage, his tone shaking you. You tried to run, but he kicked your foot, sending you sprawling. Your heart pounded, adrenaline drowning his screams. A staff member appeared, drawn by the noise, and you bolted with the bread, not looking back. His furious shouts chased you out. You ran home, nearly sick, the loaf clutched tight. You told your parents, and they banned solo shopping trips. But they didn't think about your school route. You and your sister walked just over a kilometer, a hilly path by a creek, isolated but peaceful. It was your escape, the water's murmur calming your mind. Not long after the supermarket, you saw a silver SUV parked by the creek's start. It seemed empty, but as you neared the end, the door opened, and he shouted, "Hey, want a ride home?" His voice was unmistakable, chillingly cheerful. Your sister, trusting, stepped forward. But you pulled her back. He called, "What's wrong?" Then offered to walk you home. You sprinted down the creek stupidly, knowing he'd caught Daniel before. He didn't leave the truck, just screamed and drove off. Your sister fumed about walking, but you didn't care. You were safe. The creek wasn't the end. You reached the path's end and froze. Another silver SUV, or the same one, waited on the street. Your sister, only now sensing danger, clung to you. You crossed the creek, a reckless move over slippery rocks and thorny bushes, risking injury to escape. You climbed logs, ducked branches, and reached the other road, heart pounding. Safe but shaken. You weren't sure if the SUVs were the same, but fear said they were. Your parents called the police, but nothing changed. The man's presence grew. Stolen mail, toppled bins, early morning knocks you knew were him, though proof was scarce. He was everywhere, a shadow you couldn't shake. You started avoiding the park, sticking close to home. Every stranger's face looked like his, every car a potential threat. Your parents tightened rules, but the creek path stayed your route to school. You scanned every corner, expecting his SUV. You told your cousins, but they brushed it off, saying you were paranoid. Their denial stung, but you knew what you'd seen. You started carrying a small rock in your pocket, a childish weapon against a grown man's rage. It felt useless, but it was something. The neighborhood, once your playground, was now a maze of fear. The worst came at night. Maybe a dream, maybe not. Your dad's campouts were a tradition. Movies, pizza, sleeping on the living room couch by the front door. One night, with Naruto on, and everyone asleep, you saw movement outside. There he was, in white pants and a button-up, staring at the door. His focus was unnerving, like he saw through it. He met your eyes, smirked, waved, and shushed you with a finger to his lips, then jogged away. You fell asleep, convinced it was a dream, until years later, recognizing the Naruto scene. It wasn't a dream. He'd been there, planning something. Your mom's story echoed in your mind. He wanted to silence you. You pieced it together. His threats, his attacks, his diton-tonton. His stalking, they were revenge, a twisted game. You researched the house later, finding nothing but rumors of a reclusive man with a violent past. No arrests, no records, just whispers. The police were useless, their questions dismissive. You felt betrayed, left to fend for yourself. You stopped trusting neighbors, kept your sister closer. The creek, once beautiful, was now a trap. You moved years later, but the man's eyes stayed with you. His wave a taunt you couldn't erase. You're older now, but he's not gone. The fear lingers in quiet moments, in the sound of a car idling too long. You share the story rarely, a warning to kids who think they're safe. Your sister doesn't remember, but you do. Every shout, every sprint, every glance. Was he a loner, a predator, or something worse? You'll never know, but you survived. The creek, the shop, the driveway, they're battlegrounds you won. You hold your family tighter, check locks twice, and teach your own kids to run when instinct screams. He hunted you, but you outran him, and that's your victory. The stare from the corner. The old house groaned under its own weight. Its creak's a lullaby I'd known since I was small. At 6, I was a curious kid, buzzing with excitement when a vicar came to visit my mother, who wrestled with her mind's shadows. I remember at a very young age being super excited, as a Vika was coming around to talk with my mother. She suffered severe mental health all her life and at the time was looking to religion for help. His visit was past my bedtime, but sleep wouldn't come. I wanted to meet him. Unfortunately for me, his visit was after my bedtime, but I couldn't sleep, in hope that I'd be allowed downstairs. I was just one of those kids that always find me. Wanted to be in your and one trying to meet new people. Then the stairs sang their familiar song. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbed toward my room, the old wood protesting. Eventually, I heard someone walking up the stairs. The house was very old and very creaky and towards my bedroom. My door creaked open, floorboards sighing as if someone crossed the room. My bedroom door opened, and I listened as the floorboards made the usual noise as someone was walking across my bedroom. But there was nobody there. My nightlight cast a soft glow, revealing nothing but empty space. I had a nightlight on my room so I could see very well. It happened often, doors opening, the air heavy with unseen eyes. That sort of thing would happen quite often, usually just opening my bedroom door and the feeling of being watched. I wasn't scared, not then. It was strange, but my child's mind accepted it, like a quirk of the house. I can't say that I was scared back then, but I did realize that it was strange. Years passed, the house's oddities a quiet hum in my life, fairly uneventful experiences. But at 15, everything changed. I was 15 years old and home alone. My parents were divorced, my dad off with his new partner 2 streets away. My parents had long since divorced my dad, who I lived with was spending the night with my now stepmother, who lived 2 streets away. We were moving soon, my room half packed, wrestling on the TV. We were moving from the house and I was packing up my bedroom, it should have been anyway. But basically, I was watching wrestling, Midnight came, and with it, a terror I'd never known. I was reading a magazine in bed when a wave of dread hit, nausea twisting my gut. I went to bed, was reading a magazine, and suddenly I felt the most awful fear and became extremely nauseous. My dog and cat, curled nearby, erupted. My dog and cat were in the bedroom with me. My dog began hysterically whining and barking at the whole room. She even peed on the floor, which she never did. The dog peed, barking wildly, while the cat pressed against the curtain, wailing. My cat was in the window with her face pressed against the curtain and was crying pitifully. I felt eyes boring into me from the room's corner, the dog retreating from that spot. I suddenly realized I was being watched from the corner of the room as my dog barked and backed off of that part of the room. Fear paralyzed me, a weight I couldn't shake. I couldn't look, the terror too heavy, pinning me down. I couldn't even lift my head to look as the fear was disabling to me. Finally, I bolted, the presence chasing me, close enough to feel its breath. But eventually I was able to get up and run for it. The worst part of it all was I felt this presence right behind me. In the front room, I called my dad, voice shaking, begging him to come. I got to the front room and rang my father that he needed to get here very fast. The fear was physical, a piercing pain of being watched. I was terrified beyond words with this unexplainable feeling of fear of being stared at. It was actually sort of painful. I know it makes no sense now, but that's how it felt at the time. I fumbled the front door open, collapsing into the street, the presence now in the doorway. Staring, I don't know how I managed to unlock the front door and run into the street, and fell into the middle of the road all the time being watched by something which was now in the doorway staring. I couldn't see it, my mind refusing to form its shape. What it looked like, I have no idea. It's like my brain just never put two and two together. My dog, trapped on the stairs, whimpered in terror. My poor dog, though, was stuck halfway on the stairs, crying and terrified. Dad arrived, rescuing her, but I never stepped back inside. As my dad arrived, he was able to go and get her, and I never went back into that house ever again after that. The house was gone from my life, but not my mind. That night carved itself into me, a scar I couldn't explain. What had watched me all those years, waiting to unleash that fear. I started noticing things after, shadows in new homes, a chill when alone. Was it tied to the house or to me, following like a shadow? I dug into the house's past, finding no deaths, no horrors, just an old structure with creaking bones. But the animals knew, their panic a warning I ignored too long. My mother's struggles, her search for faith. Did they draw something in, or was it always there? Now, I lock every door, check every corner. Every creak in my new home echoes that night. Every glance at a window feels like a risk. My dog's gone, but I see her fear in my dreams, hear the cat's cries. What stood in that corner, and why did it wait? I avoid old houses, their silence too loud, their shadows too deep. The stare from that night never left, a presence I can't name, watching still, waiting for its one day to come. The face at the window, the house was a cage, its walls holding more than memories. The narrator's father revealed that their old home was a place of terror, where he was grabbed and tripped on the stairs, the upstairs, a realm he kept secret to shield his child. What force haunted those steps, waiting in the dark? The air seemed to pulse, the house's silence a lie, hiding its truth. Had it marked them all, or was it still watching? He spoke of the banister, a lifeline against unseen hands. He urged the narrator to hold the banister, a precaution born of his own encounters with something that pulled and pushed. The upstairs was a void, its rooms heavy with a presence that clung to the soul. The narrator, young then, had sensed it too. A weight in the air, a shadow in the corners. What lived in those walls, and why had it spared the child? Years later, the house haunted their dreams. In a recurring dream, the narrator returned home, joyful, only to find a storm in the garden, sobbing as they felt eyes watching from their bedroom window. The window was a portal, its glass framing a gaze that burned through the rain. They stood, drenched, the wind a roar, their tears mixing with the deluge. Who watched from that height, and what did they want? Each dream ended in fear, a glance avoided. They braced to turn, to face the window, but always woke before seeing the watcher. The dream a torment that struck monthly. The garden, the storm, the window. They were chains, binding them to the house. The narrator's heart raced each time, the unseen eyes a weight that lingered in daylight. Was it a memory, or something calling them back? One night, the dream changed, and truth broke free. They turned, meeting the eyes of a face from the house, the same that had driven them out, only to forget it upon waking, the dream never returning. The face was gone, but its echo remained, a scar on their mind. The house was far away, but its grip was eternal. Had they seen it, or had it seen them, claiming them in that final glance? The house was no longer theirs, but it owned them still. The narrator carried the dream like a wound, its storm and window vivid in quiet moments. They saw the garden in their mind, the rain a curtain, the window a mirror to something beyond. Was the face human, or a mask for something older? The father's stories, of hands on the stairs, of upstairs dread, wove into their own, a tapestry of fear. Had the house chosen them, or were they merely its latest guests? They sought answers, digging into the house's past. A neighbor, old and wary, spoke of a tragedy, a family lost to fire, their home rebuilt on cursed ground. The upstairs, she said, was where the mother had stood, watching the garden, her eyes never leaving the world she'd lost. Was she the face, her grief a force that lingered? The narrator found no records, only whispers on X of homes where windows held watchers, their gazes a warning. Each tale tightened the knot in their chest. The father's silence had been a shield, but it broke too late. He'd felt it, fought it, yet never named it, his warnings coded in the banister's grip. The narrator began to notice signs, a creak in their new home, a shadow at the edge of sleep. Had the face followed, or was it the house, its reach unbound? They avoided windows at night, the glass a threat, its reflections too alive. What had it seen in them? That night they met its gaze. They spoke with their father again, his voice low, his eyes distant. He admitted to dreams of his own, of stairs that shifted, of hands that pulled. The house had marked him, as it had them, its windows portals to a truth they couldn't grasp. They prayed now, a habit born of fear, their words a frail barrier. The face was forgotten, but its weight endured, a presence that watched from every darkened pane. Was it gone, or merely waiting, its eyes hidden in the storm? The narrator lives with it now, a shadow in their soul. They see the window in quiet moments, the rain, the gaze that knew them. The house is gone, its walls dust, but its watcher remains, a memory that breathes. They wonder if it watches still, from some unseen height, its face a secret they'll never recall. The storm is silent, but the eyes are not, and they fear the night they might turn again. The midnight call from the grave. In the dead of night, when the world holds its breath, a phone can ring with a voice that shouldn't exist. I sat in the quiet of an Oklahoma 911 dispatch center, the hum of monitors my only company, unaware of the line that would blur reality. The call came from nowhere, a signal from a place long forsaken, where no one lives and no one speaks. Heavy breathing filled my ear, a sound too real, too close, from a cemetery 5 miles away. It wasn't a prank, not after decades. It was a plea, or a warning, from something beyond the grave. And once I answered, I knew I'd never hear silence the same way again. I recently started working as a 911 dispatcher at a police department in Oklahoma. I love it. One night, a co-worker was talking about ghosts. I said I didn't believe in them. He said, "Oh, you will." His grin was knowing, his eyes glinting with a secret I wasn't ready for. The 911 phone rang, not a landline. Only answers and rings for 911. He said, "Come get this phone." I answered, heard heavy breathing, asked if they could hear me, who was calling. After 43 seconds, they hung up. The sound was raw, deliberate, like someone, or something, wanted me to listen. He laughed, pointed to the map. The phone number was a landline, plotted in the middle of an old base camp cemetery outside town. Nobody lives within 5 miles. The screen glowed, the pin precise, a dot in a void where life had no place. The mapping on 911 landlines is accurate within 5 inches. He told me to redial. I did. The number wasn't available. I stared at the phone, its silence mocking. The call's origin a puzzle with no pieces. He said this happens every night. The supervising officer came in. I asked how long. He said every night for at least 23 years. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. A man who'd heard that call too many times. They used to send officers. It's gated. They checked everything. Nobody's there. Someone calls 911 from an abandoned cemetery every night, from a landline number unavailable for over 20 years. The words sank in, heavy as the breathing. A ritual no one could stop. I'm in shock. No prank lasts this long. A landline cord can't reach 5 miles. The calls change times. It's an abandoned burial ground. Nothing there. I sat frozen. The dispatch center suddenly too small. The night too vast. The cemetery was a relic, its name lost to time, a forgotten plot of unmarked graves and crumbling stones. I'd heard of places like it in Oklahoma, Brown Springs, where outlaws' ghosts were said to linger. But this was different. No stories, just silence. I asked my co-worker about the land. He shrugged, said it was an old base camp, abandoned since the Dust Bowl, its workers buried where they fell. No one went there. The gate rusted shut, the nearest road a mile off. I checked the system later. The call's data clean, no errors. The line traced to a point no living soul could reach. I called a friend, a retired dispatcher, hoping for logic. She paused, said some calls don't have answers, told me about a similar line in Tulsa, ringing from a burned-down house. This wasn't rare. It was Oklahoma, where the land held grudges. I couldn't sleep that night, the breathing replaying in my head. I searched online, found forums about haunted cemeteries, whispers of voices from graves, but nothing matched our call. The supervising officer's words stuck. 23 years, every night, no explanation. I asked him if they'd dug deeper, checked the line. He said they tried, found nothing but old wires, buried under dirt no one touched. The cemetery was off limits now, private land, its secrets locked behind gates. I drove by the next day, the road empty, the horizon flat. I didn't stop. Didn't need to. The air felt wrong, like it was waiting. I don't laugh at ghost stories anymore. Don't trust the quiet. And when the phone rings at dispatch, I hesitate, afraid it's calling me back to the grave. The shadow in the rain. You're 23, trudging through a freezing, rain-soaked morning to catch the bus to work. The woods behind your street loom dark, silent, a wall of secrets. A noise snaps you alert. An older man, steps too quiet, shadows you on your empty road. He's not heading to work, no bag, no umbrella, just purpose in his pace. You know who he might be, and it's not just a neighbor. He's hunting, and you're alone. You walk to the bus stop every morning, a routine etched into 7 months of early shifts. Your street, the last in the neighborhood, backs onto woods. No houses, no lights, just trees. Most days, it's just you, though a guy from the next street sometimes hurries by. This morning was dark, freezing, rain pelting down. Halfway across your street, a noise stopped you. A rustle. Too close. You turned, and there he was, an older man, walking silently behind you. You're female, 23, and alone. He had no backpack, no umbrella, despite the rain, like he'd timed his exit with yours. Your stomach twisted. Had he been waiting? He walked slowly, but when you sped up, he matched your pace. You glanced back, and he was closer, steps deliberate. Panic surged, your hand fumbling for the taser in your backpack. You ran, terrified, to the bus stop where others waited. You watched for him, but he never passed. There was no other way out. He'd vanished or given up. The relief was fleeting. You know about the man in your neighborhood, a serial rapist from the 90s, now free after prison. Last month, he lingered around your house, offering to tend your garden while your dad was away. Your mom brushed it off, but you saw him watching, too often, too long. You couldn't confirm it was him in the dark, but your gut screamed his name. You told your parents, who urged you to report it. The police took a statement, but without a clear view, they could do little. You started carrying your taser everywhere, checking shadows on your street. You researched his past, convictions, parole, a history of stalking. His face, or what you imagined it to be, haunted your mornings. You changed your route, left earlier, but the woods felt alive, watching. If it was him, he knew where you lived, and he wasn't done. You warned your neighbors, but some dismissed you, saying he was reformed. You knew better. His steps echoed in your dreams, a hunter still on the prowl. The man in the hood. The city's pulse faded as the tram hummed through the night, carrying me toward home, alone. At 17, I was chasing independence, fresh from a concert that left my ears ringing and my heart high. I went to a concert with my friend. The concert was in the main city I lived about 40 minutes drive away. I'd lied to my mom, claiming my friend's parents would drive me back. I told my mother that my friend's parent would be giving me a ride home because there was no way that my mother would have let me make my own way home during the night. Truth was, I wanted to prove I could handle it. When I think about it now, I really don't know why I lied. I think that I was just trying to be independent, I guess. The tram was a ghost, its seats empty, its silence loud. I'd expected a Friday night crowd, but I was wrong. I thought that there would be a lot of people getting off the tram at the same stop as me, but I was wrong. There was barely anyone on the tram. I'd ridden this route countless times, knew its rhythm. I took notice of this too because my I got in the tram hundreds of times by now, and I thought that I could handle myself. At 5'8", strong for a girl, I felt capable. I was a physically strong girl, and I was about 5'8" at that time, which was considered tall. Earphones in, music drowning the world. I stepped off at my stop. I just put my earphones on, and I listened to music like I always did on public transport. I got to my stop and got off and started walking home. Then I felt him. A man trailed behind, his hood up, face hidden in the dark, but there was someone walking behind me. It was a man. I couldn't see his face. It was kind of dark, and he had his hood up. He was my height, muscular, maybe in his 30s. From the way that he was built, I'd say he was maybe in his 30s. He was around the same height as me, and visibly more muscular. I brushed it off. My town of 40,000 was busy. The route from the tram stop singular, hemmed by the motorway. I still didn't think anything of it, because I live in a very populated place. After all, the town has like 40,000 people. There was only really one route to get out of the tram stop and into the main town, because it was beside the motorway. The air shifted, heavy with his gaze. Past the highway, a prickle ran down my neck. His steps deliberate, keeping distance, but matching my pace. Once I had gotten by the highway, I suddenly had a weird feeling the guy was staying back, and purposely sort of staying behind me. I could just feel the eyes burning into the back of my neck. I told myself to calm down. The housing complex was close, familiar, and it was only then that I thought that something was off. But I told myself to just stop overreacting because we all have to go through the same route, and my housing complex was the closest complex to the tram stop. I walked faster, praying for clear crossings. I picked up my pace, and I prayed that there would be no traffic lights that had to be followed. I didn't want him catching up to me after all. My gut screamed not to drown it out with louder music. I had the urge to increase the music volume on my earphones, to be more oblivious to it, I guess. But my gut was wrenching, telling me not to do this. He didn't stop. At the complex's entrance, I expected him to pass, but his steps quickened, closing the gap. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes, I finally got to my housing complex. There's different lanes and twists and turns for each house cluster in the complex. I thought that once I got to the entrance of the complex, the man would just walk by. But in the end, he didn't. He was actually catching up to me now. It was predatory. His intent clear. He was walking faster. And like he had something to get to that. Something probably. Being me, it was literally like a predator stalking prey. And this was the point that he was ready to pounce. I gripped my keys, a makeshift weapon, refusing to run. My shoes weren't built for it, and panic would slow me. I wanted to stay calm. I wasn't a great runner, and my shoes weren't exactly ideal for running either. If I ran, my chances of getting home would definitely decrease. I felt in my pocket for my keys, making sure that I'd have them ready to unlock the door, or in the worst-case scenario as a weapon. The complex's maze of turns was my shield. I knew every neighbor, every house. I was still trying to convince myself that maybe he lived in a complex as well. But I knew that he didn't live at my housing cluster. Well, we all knew our neighbors. At the sharp turn to my cluster, I braced for relief. I had the sharp turn ahead. It was only steps away. I was praying once I got there that they would just go in another direction to the other cluster of houses. But his steps grew louder, heavier, closer. I got to the sharp turn, and I was ready to let out a sigh of relief and call myself an idiot until I heard his steps. They were getting quicker now, louder and heavier. My house was down the hill, seconds away if I sprinted. But I held steady, masking my fear. My house was in reach. It was only down the hill if I sprinted, I would be there in 30 seconds, but I didn't want to chase down to my door. I walked faster, not too fast to let him know that I had alarm bee screaming in my head, but not too relaxed to get caught either. My breath hitched, the hill's descent my final stretch. I could hear my breathing hitching. I was finally walking down the hill. The steps stopped, silence deafening. I didn't hear any steps anymore. At the last turn, I glanced back. He stood at the hill's crest, watching, unmoving. I was finally at the last turn, and once I got there, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing at the top of the hill, just watching. My fear was real, no longer paranoia. At that point, it couldn't have been any more obvious that I wasn't being paranoid. I reached my door, keys trembling in my hand, and locked myself in. I walked down the turn. My house was out of sight from the hill. I still heard no footsteps. I finally got to the point where I was unlocking my door, stepping inside and locking the door from the inside. I was finally safe. Inside, my body betrayed me. Sweat poured, limbs shook, breath ragged. I didn't notice either until I was in my house just how much sweat was dropping from my forehead and my lip. I didn't notice how much I was shaking or just how difficult it was to really breathe. Safe, with my parents nearby, I was untouched. But it was okay. I was home, and I was in the home with my two parents in arm's reach. I never saw him again, but the memory lingered, buried until I was older. Thankfully, I never saw that person again, and I think I just sort of blocked it out in the end. I just kept denying how terrifying the encounter actually was. I'd dismissed it as paranoia, but in my late 20s, the truth hit hard. I guess I once again just kept pinning it to my general paranoia. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I could look back on it and see what a dangerous situation that I was actually in. The encounter reshaped me. That night, I'd felt like prey, his gaze a weight I couldn't shake. What did he want? And why me? I started noticing things after. Men lingering too long at tram stops, shadows in alleys that felt too deliberate. Was he a stranger? Or someone who knew my routine, my independence, a beacon? I stopped wearing earphones in public, kept my keys ready, mapped every route home. The city I loved became a maze of threats, every stranger a potential predator. I told my mom years later, her face paling as she realized how close I'd come to danger. She'd have driven me, kept me safe, but I'd chosen the tram. Chosen risk. Now, I scan every crowd, every street, every footstep behind me echoes that night. Every hooded figure, a reminder. I moved away, but the fear followed. A shadow I can't outrun. What stopped him at the hill? And what would have happened if I'd run? The complex, once home, is a place I avoid. Its turns too sharp. Its hills too steep. I don't walk alone at night anymore, not because I'm weak, but because I know how fast safety can vanish. That man, his hood, his stare, they're burned into me, a warning I'll never forget. The cry from the river. The forest was a living thing, its shadows whispering secrets only the river knew. At a riverfront property along the Hood Canal, the narrator lay awake in a house surrounded by dense woods, the open windows carrying the river's gentle murmur. What stirred in the darkness beyond the trees? The night was calm, the air cool, but a tension hung over the isolated land, as if the forest held its breath. Had something crossed the river, or was it already here? A sound broke the silence, sharp and wild. Splashing in the river startled the narrator's dog, a noise they attributed to elk or deer crossing the wild waters. But the river's rhythm faltered, its bubbles drowned by something heavier, something deliberate. The dog's ears twitched, its low growl a warning the narrator couldn't ignore. Was it just an animal, or did the forest hide a stranger truth? The night deepened, the stars above swallowed by clouds, the house a fragile island in the wilderness. Then, the cry came. Raw and unnatural. A deep, bellowing scream, mixed with a yell, echoed through the woods, fast and rhythmic, unlike any cougar or fox the narrator knew. It was no animal they'd heard before, not the high-pitched wail of a fox, not the guttural roar of a bear. The sound moved, crossing the river, creeping closer to the house's right side. What could cry with such cadence, such intent? The narrator's pulse raced, the dog's unease mirroring their own. The forest's silence now a threat. It changed, and the world tilted. The cry shifted, becoming a human-like scream of help, deranged and slurred, as if the words struggled to form. It was a voice, yet not a voice, too raw, too broken, a mimicry of panic that chilled the blood. The narrator woke their girlfriend, her eyes wide as the scream pierced the night again, clear and desperate. Was it a person, or something wearing a human sound? The dogs erupted, their barks a frantic alarm, the house alive with fear. The scream stopped, but the terror lingered. After waking the girlfriend's parents and locking all doors, the narrator found no traces of the source, the scream fading before others could hear its full horror. Flashlights swept the woods, revealing nothing, no tracks, no blood, no sign of life. The river flowed on, its surface unbroken, but the narrator's mind churned. What had screamed, and why had it stopped? The forest, vast and unyielding, seemed to swallow the truth, its trees guarding a secret older than the house. The morning brought no answers, only questions. The narrator and their girlfriend walked the property, searching for signs, a paw print, a broken branch, anything to explain the night. The riverbank was pristine, the forest floor untouched, as if the cry had never been. Had it been a trick of the wind, or something that left no trace? The dogs, still skittish, sniffed the air, their eyes fixed on the trees. The Olympic Peninsula was wild, home to elk, cougars, and bears, but none matched the scream's depth. Its human-like plea, wildliferemoval.com/animal sound. Identification guide. They turned to local lore, hoping for clarity. A neighbor, weathered by years in the woods, spoke of strange sounds along the Hood Canal, cries that weren't animal, weren't human. Some called it the river's voice, others a spirit of the forest, born of ancient wrongs. The Quileute tales whispered of entities that mimicked men, luring the unwary into the trees. The narrator found posts on X, stories of screams like theirs, some blaming foxes, others hinting at cryptids, none fit. The word help, too clear, too deliberate. Reddit.com or backwoods, creepywas, comments. After animal cry morphs into man screaming for help. The girlfriend's parents, skeptical, suggested a lost hiker, caught in the river's current. But the speed of the cry's approach, its echo, matched the river's flow, not a man's stumble. The narrator regretted staying inside, their fear outweighing their urge to investigate. Had they missed a chance to see it, to know it? They listened to recordings, cougars wailing, foxes shrieking, even ravens mimicking, but none carried the weight, the cadence of that night. The scream was unique, a sound that belonged to the forest alone. Wildliferemoval.com Animal Sound Identification Guide. Reddit.com Animalid comments 60 what animal makes this call? Not the owls. The house felt different now, its walls too thin. The narrator avoided the windows, the river's murmur no longer soothing. They dreamed of the cry, of eyes in the trees, of a shape that spoke but wasn't human. Was it a warning or an invitation? The girlfriend, shaken, checked the locks nightly, her sleep broken by every rustle. The forest had spoken, and they'd heard its voice, but its meaning eluded them. They began to pray, a quiet act of defiance, their words a shield against the unknown. The cry haunts them still, a riddle without an answer. The narrator wonders if it waits, hidden in the river's depths, its scream a lure for those who listen too closely. The Hood Canal flows on, its waters hiding what the forest knows. They'll never walk those woods alone, the cry a reminder of a truth too vast to grasp. The house stands, but the river owns it, and the narrator feels its gaze, eternal and unyielding. What cried that night, and will it call again? The unseen guest in the house, in the quiet of a family home, where love and laughter should reign. An unseen force can turn warmth to dread. I stood in the hallway, my child in my arms, frozen as a door swung open without a touch, defying the stillness of the night. It wasn't the wind, not a trick. It was something else, something that had been watching us. For years, I'd sensed it, felt its presence in the creaks and shadows, but no one believed me. Now, with a lamp flaring to life on its own, my family's skepticism crumbled, and the truth emerged. We weren't alone. This was no ghost story. It was our reality, and it was closing in. I've always been sensitive, but this started to frighten me. It began when my youngest was a toddler, the house we called home turning strange, its corners hiding secrets I couldn't name. One night, I was getting ready to put my youngest to bed. He'd fallen asleep on the couch. We kept all bedroom doors closed. He was walking, had brained himself on the door multiple times trying to close it. I picked him up, asked my middle, 3 years old, to open the door for me. As I waited in the hall, the bedroom door clicked open, swung into the room. I froze in shock, snapped out when my middle asked why I asked him to open the door that was already open. I shrugged it off, told him I forgot I'd opened it. But I hadn't. Those doors were heavy, stubborn, never moving on their own. No door in my house swings open like that. It stays where you leave it. When I told my husband, he brushed it off, said I imagined it. A breeze pushed it open. His logic was a comfort, but it didn't fit. The air was still, the house sealed tight. The next day, I tested it, left the door cracked, carried my youngest to the same area. The door didn't move. I opened the windows. It still didn't move. The test was proof, a challenge to my fear, but the door's silence only deepened the mystery. Over the years, I've seen and heard things in my house no one else sees or hears. They brush it off, say I'm imagining things. Footsteps in empty rooms, whispers in the dark. I kept them to myself. My family's doubt a wall I couldn't breach. I'd given up explaining to my family. They didn't believe me. I buried my unease, convinced myself it was nothing, until the house spoke louder. I'd gone to take a shower. My husband was watching a movie, eating ice cream with the kids, lights off for movie night. When my daughter came back from the kitchen, sat next to her dad, pulled her feet onto the couch. The lamp in the corner turned on. My husband thought it was my middle child, asked if he was behind the couch. Seconds later, he walked in from the kitchen. This lamp is a crank lamp. You have to turn the dial hard to light it. I'd turned it off before my shower, knowing they'd start the movie. When I left the bathroom, my husband looked at me, said, "I think you were right about the ghost." He pulled up the security camera footage. You clearly see the light turn on, hear him ask for my middle child. see him enter seconds later. The footage was undeniable, a crack in his skepticism, a truth we couldn't ignore. I feel smug, no longer called crazy. But the activity has picked up. Makes me uneasy, especially since my youngest started seeing the same figure I see. The figure is vague, a shadow with weight, lurking in doorways, always just out of reach. I tried to dismiss it, to cling to logic, but the house wouldn't let me. Objects moved, keys on the counter one moment, in a drawer the next. The air grew heavy at night, a pressure that woke me, my youngest clinging to me, whispering about the man. I asked what he saw, his words chilling, a tall shape watching from his doorway, gone when he blinked. My husband, now a believer, installed more cameras, but they caught nothing, only static where the figure stood. I spoke to a neighbor, an old woman who'd lived here decades. She frowned, said the house had guests before us, tenants who left quickly, never explaining why. No records, no names, just whispers of unease, a history the house kept secret. I stopped sleeping through the night, my dreams filled with doors opening, lights flickering. I researched local lore, found tales of Oklahoma homes holding spirits, restless from forgotten tragedies. A librarian showed me an article about a man who'd lived nearby, lost to illness, his family vanishing after. Was he our guest, or something older? I called a friend, a medium, who warned not to acknowledge it, to keep my children close. But my youngest's fear grew. His drawings now filled with a shadowed figure, its edges too sharp. My husband suggested moving, but the house felt like it was listening, its presence stronger, as if daring us to leave. I don't know what it wants, but it's not just watching anymore. It's reaching out. And in the quiet, when the lights dim, I feel it. Closer, waiting, claiming us as its own. The Faceless Lady. You're 10, sharing a bedroom with your little sister, when the night turns wrong. You wake, heart racing, to a figure gliding silently. A woman, ghostly, her face a blank void. She bends over your sister, but her eyeless gaze locks on you. Your sister sees her too, watching you instead, and calls her harmless. But harmless doesn't stare like that, doesn't linger like a secret you weren't meant to see. She's still with you, and you're not sure she ever left. You and your sister, 8, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, a family of 3. You always felt uneasy, catching glimpses of things in the corner of your eye. You watched Ghost Whisperer, feeding your young imaginations. One night you woke abruptly, sitting up in bed. Your eyes adjusted, and there she was, a tall, translucent figure, shaped like a woman in a Victorian dress, her skirt puffed, holding a lace-trimmed umbrella. Her image burned into you, vivid and unshakable. She glided to your sister's bed, bending so slowly it was almost imperceptible, until she was face to face with her sleeping form. You fixated on her face, or where it should have been, just a smooth, empty void. She wasn't looking at your sister, she was staring at you. She didn't move, frozen in place. Panic hit. You felt you'd seen something forbidden. You lay back, pulling the covers over your head, terrified she'd come for you next. Time seemed to stop, the air heavy with her presence. Morning came, and you asked your sister if she'd seen anything, hesitant to scare her. She admitted she woke up, saw the woman bent over you, staring. She described the same dress, the umbrella, the missing face. She felt the woman was kind, harmless, and went back to sleep. You were stunned. Your 8-year-old sister saw her too, but thought she meant no harm. You weren't so sure. You thought it was the ghost shows, but her matching story shook you. Years later, you talked, and she still remembers every detail. The apartment always felt wrong, like it held secrets older than you. You dug into its history, finding whispers of a woman who lived there decades ago, lost to time. Was she tied to the building or to you? You moved away, but her faceless stare follows, a memory neither of you can shake. She's still there in the dark, watching. The shadow from the board, in the darkness of a troubled mind, a single act can open doors that should stay shut. I was a child, lost in despair, reaching for answers in places I didn't understand, unaware of the cost. The Ouija board, a Christmas gift, became my gateway. Its planchette, a key to something ancient and hungry. A room turned to ice. A mirror showed a creature no child should see. And I ran, but not far enough. It took something from me, left a void I still feel. A shadow that lingers in my weakest moments. I closed the board, but the door it opened never shut, and I fear it's still out there, waiting. When I was 13, I was in a dark place, cutting, messing with Satanism. I was suspicious of spirituality information, never held it to much truth. My family had experiences, abilities. My mom was an empath, could dream about events that would happen. My brother saw, dreamed about spirits in the house. I never knew what my thing was. My mom warned me about messing with evil, said I'm an energetic beacon. I didn't listen. I was drowning in depression, my world a haze of pain and doubt, seeking meaning in the wrong places. I got a Ouija board for Christmas, was in terrible depression, the perfect feeding ground for something evil. For a week, nothing happened. I played alone, rushed the process, did everything wrong. I treated it like a toy, ignorant of its power, until I decided to take it seriously. I followed the directions, called out. The room got freezing. It sounded like I put AirPods in with noise canceling, heard loud ringing. The planchette moved to yes. The air turned sharp, the silence deafening. A presence I couldn't see but felt in my bones. It was more than I was prepared for. I freaked out, closed the session with an okay goodbye. That ticked off whatever was there. It got so cold, the hair on my body stood up. I looked in the mirror across the room, saw a goat-legged figure with wings, squinted eyes, lurching towards me, open-armed. Its form was monstrous, a nightmare given flesh, its intent clear and malevolent. I ran out, tried to tell my father, stepmom. They laughed, said I was ridiculous. Their dismissal cut deeper than my own blades, leaving me alone with my terror. The next few days, I couldn't sleep, eat, was constantly crying, felt sick to my stomach. My father didn't believe in that stuff, made me take the board to my mother's. I was a ghost in my own body, haunted by what I'd unleashed, my fear a constant companion. My mom immediately felt something was off. I was too afraid to tell the truth, kept it secret. That week, we all had a strange dream about a woman with an unhinged jaw, screaming over us with no sound, waking at the same time, dogs running from me, hiding under furniture. The house felt wrong, its warmth drained, the dog's fear a mirror of my own. My mom threw out anything with energy tied to it. She sensed the darkness, her instincts sharper than mine, purging what she could. After a fight about why I hadn't eaten, I confessed, brought the board, explained everything. My mom wasn't mad, relieved, knew how to fix it. Her calm was a lifeline, her knowledge my only hope. She set up a safe environment to exercise me, poured salt around me, the board, candles, holy water. Everyone left except me and my stepdad. We held our hands on the planchette. The spirit went crazy, trying to move off the board, counting backwards, going to letters. He kept saying to leave our house, leave me alone. It stopped after 5 minutes. The air was thick, the board alive with resistance, each movement a battle. In the silence, my stomach rumbled loud. I felt a hunger I'd never felt. Devoured a large stuffed crust pizza, my stomach bloated. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 weeks. The hunger was primal, a sign the grip had loosened, but not fully. Since then, I've never felt the same. My mother said that week she couldn't feel my presence, like I was muted. I've always wondered if it ate part of me, or if it follows me. The emptiness was real, a piece of me lost. My light dimmed. I threw out all my creepy things, converted to Wicca, practiced purification rituals, clean energy. When I'm depressed, I see a shadow figure in the corner of my eye, in dark rooms. Maybe paranoia, but part of me thinks differently. It's there, fleeting, a reminder of what I invited, what I can't fully escape. The ritual saved me, but it didn't erase the mark. I live cleaner now. My Wiccan practice is a shield, but the shadow lingers, tied to my darkest days. I told a friend, a spiritual healer, about the figure. She said Ouija boards can open doors that don't close, inviting entities that feed on vulnerability. She urged me to strengthen my protections, to never touch a board again. I haven't, but the fear remains, a constant whisper in my mind. I researched the board's history, found stories of others who called something they couldn't send back. A forum post described a similar creature. Goat legs, wings, a hunger that followed. I stopped looking, afraid of what I'd find. My mom watches me closely now, her empath's sense attuned, warning me when my energy dips. The dogs are calmer, but they avoid my room. Their instincts sharper than mine. I don't talk about it much. The laughter from my father still stinging. But the dreams persist. The woman's silent scream a recurring nightmare. Her jaw unhinged, her eyes empty. I asked a Wiccan elder about it, who said I'd drawn something ancient, something that doesn't leave easily. She taught me new rituals, sage and salt, but the shadow still creeps in. I moved houses, hoping distance would help, but the figure follows, faint in mirrors, corners, always when I'm low. I wonder if it's cheated. My mind broken, or if it's real. A piece of that cold night still clinging. I don't touch mirrors in the dark anymore, don't linger in silence, and when the air grows cold, I feel it, watching, waiting, a shadow I can't outrun. The ghost in the clearing. You're 19, a paratrooper in the Greek army, standing guard in a freezing, moonlit camp. The night is silent, the wind your only companion, until a tall, dark shape emerges from the trees. It moves, slow and steady, like it's floating, straight toward your booth. Your rifle's raised, your heart pounding. You shout, but it doesn't stop. You're ready to fire, certain it's a ghost, when a voice breaks the spell. One wrong move, and you could have killed, or been haunted forever. Your dad was 19, serving in the Greek Army's Special Forces, Paratrooper Division. Military service was mandatory for men at 18, and his camp, like most, sat in the secluded countryside, the nearest town 3 kilometers away. It was his turn for guard duty, one of 5 or 6 soldiers picked each night. They slept in the same barracks, woken 30 minutes before relieving the previous shift. Each shift lasted 2 hours, the midnight to dawn ones brutal, cold, dark, and exhausting. He stood by his booth with an M1 Garand rifle, a World War II relic the Greek army still used. The night was silent, only the wind audible. the moon offering faint visibility. Shadows stretched long, but the camp was a clearing, sparse of vegetation, with a distant tree line. Everything seemed normal until a tall, dark mass appeared on the path from the trees, moving toward his booth. His pulse spiked, fear gripping him. It moved slowly, steadily, almost floating with long, deliberate steps. He followed protocol, raising his rifle and shouting, "Halt! Identify yourself!" No response. The shape kept coming. He shouted again, "Halt! Identify yourself!" but got nothing. He was sure it was a ghost, a specter from the dark. He thought, let's see if a ghost can die. But first, he had to yell a code word to raise the alarm. The next guard, hundreds of meters away, would hear it, shout it too, chaining the alert to the patrol, a lieutenant and 5 soldiers checking booths. If caught off post, you'd face hell. If you raised a false alarm, you'd get prison, extra service days. He heard the shouts echo, knowing the patrol was coming, but they could take minutes. The figure was 50 meters away, closing in. He aimed, finger on the trigger, ready to fire. Then a voice called, "Relax! His last name, it's me!" It was a drunk soldier, draped in a black blanket, sneaking back from town, bottle in hand. Your dad let him pass, but dread hit. He'd raised the alarm for nothing. The patrol arrived, and he didn't snitch. The officer said they'd talk tomorrow. Next morning, expecting punishment, he stood in line, but his name wasn't called. The drunk soldier and the lieutenant were friends. The incident was buried, like it never happened. Relief mixed with fear. What if he'd shot? Your dad still thinks about it. The ghost that wasn't. The camp's isolation, the moon's dim glow, made every shadow a threat. He started questioning the dark, wondering what else hid in the trees. Years later, he told you, his voice low, the chill of that night still in his bones. You never looked at clearings the same, sensing eyes in every empty space. The ghost was human, but the terror was real, and it never left him.